Good morning, everybody, and welcome. On this first Friday in February, the Oregon Housing Stability Council meeting will be convening in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for your patience. Let's see, I'm showing 9 a.m. and I believe we do have a quorum, correct?
We're waiting on Councilmember Farrell, Mena, and Rogers. So we do have a quorum of 6
I was
present.
going to say that still gives us a quorum of 6. So
Yes.
in the interests of a very full agenda, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and if we could have a roll call, please, to get things started.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum.
Present.
Councilmember Farrell.
Present.
Chair Hall.
Present.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Rogers.
Present.
Councilmember Harris.
Present.
Councilmember Meehan.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Present.
Thank you, council members. We do have quorum.
Okay. We are going to get things started now with public comment, and there will be the timer running on the screen. We have a long public sign-up list, so I'm going to ask that comments be limited to 2 minutes today. 2 minutes. And first up, I believe, Ramon Hernandez.
One moment, Ramona. I'm looking for you on the list. Go ahead, Ramona.
I'm sorry, it's Ramon Hernandez.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
All right. Hello to all. My name is Ramon Hernandez. I'm here representing Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency as a community engagement specialist. First of all, I want to thank you all for the amazing work you all do in our communities across Oregon, helping families and youth access equal and proper housing. Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency is aligned with Oregon State Housing Early Education Policy. In particular, our agency supports the Raise Up Oregon Early Childhood System Plan, as we offer federal Head Start programs, as well as Oregon pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade programming for more than 500 families in the Mid-Willamette Valley. We envision a future where our state encourages and supports child development by integrating early learning with safe and affordable housing for the families in need. Launching the co-location of affordable rental housing, as well as the early care and education programs, is something that will do just that by fully funding localized support services. These services will help children and families build opportunities and resource centers in an equitable manner. As well, We want to express support for the Youth Emergency Housing Assistance Program, which will provide funds for students and families facing homelessness in our state. We serve hundreds of homeless youth aged 11 through 17 in our rapid rehousing program, as well as 2 shelters, David's House and Taylor's House. This spring, we will be opening up a 36-bed family shelter and hope to address the growing housing crisis by providing safe spaces for young people at risk of homelessness. Our agency hopes and advocates that throughout the decision-making process, OHCS and the Housing Stability Council not only engages with regional MAT groups, but also nonprofit community partners such as the Oregon Alliance for Homeless Youth, youth shelter providers, community action agencies, and culturally specific organizations. These historic initiatives and investments align with our agency's mission, and we want to thank you for all the time and the patience. We are very much looking forward to hearing more details. Thank you all for the time and patience. Have a good day.
Thank you. Trell Anderson,
Good morning.
good morning. Go
Good
ahead.
morning, Chair Hall, council members, Director Bell. My name is Trell Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Housing Alternatives. I've submitted some testimony in writing, but want to read it into the record, please. The ice storm this past January produced several storylines reporting tragedy and economic hardships because of the shutdown of roads, public transit, damage of fallen trees, broken water lines. The intensity of the storm resulted in the governor declaring a state of emergency. Affordable housing properties across the region were damaged during the storm, and there is an economic impact to the community-based nonprofit organizations who partner with you in Oregon Housing and Community Services to provide housing stability throughout the region. These are properties within the OHCS portfolio. For example, among the multifamily properties owned and sponsored by Northwest Housing Alternatives, 4 were damaged by bursting sprinkler systems because of the freeze, and 1 from a large fallen tree that resulted in structural damage to a building. Additionally, 5 of our group homes that support people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities were damaged, all by bursting sprinklers, 1 resulting in the temporary relocation of residents and their 24/7 support staff teams. It will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair the damage from the ice storm. Some of this can be paid out of insurance claims and some from property reserves, but not all. I believe you're aware of the outrageous increase in insurance costs over the last 3 years. So we have to determine if we want to file a claim and risk yet further insurance repercussions or pay for it out of pocket.
Okay, we're at time. I'm sorry. We need to move on. And next up would be Rachel Duke.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. Familiar faces. Hello. Thanks for making time for me this morning. And I'm going to try to skip over the parts of my testimony that Trell just said and just add a little bit more information. I do have a letter that I also submitted, but here I'm just going to read a portion to you. We also experienced a tremendous impact from the storm. 4 of our 11 properties were impacted through falling trees, freezing water, and sewer lines. And the storm clearly highlighted kind of where the fractures are in our society, impacting individuals who with least means the most. So what I want to kind of just go on to say is, for us, we had to evacuate 11 households. The transitional housing that we are providing, because we don't want to have anyone be discharged into homelessness while we work on their apartments. That is all on us. That it's not even insurance eligible. We had several units that were threatened by trees that looked like they were going to fall any second, and we had to take those down. So far, that's we estimate about $100,000 to SEPA, because that is also not eligible for insurance. And so then we have the same kind of dilemma that Trell described of choosing what, when we bill insurance, but also what comes out of property reserves. And actually, what can property reserves even bear? Because at that particular community that I'm talking about, that that amount of money actually exceeds property reserves. So there's no way that a big chunk of that isn't going to be coming from SEPA. So as climate continues to change, these kinds of occurrences are going to become more commonplace and will threaten the stability of our residents as well as affordable housing providers. We need to address issues around insurance and relief funding for organizations impacted by extreme weather and climate-related events, including the storm that we just
Okay,
had.
we're at time, I'm sorry.
No worries, thanks.
Okay, Susan Manley. Is Susan Manley on the line?
Susie Manley.
Suzanne Manley, maybe? Gonna move on to Karina McCormick.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yes, are you Karina McCormick?
I am.
Okay, you're signed up for public testimony. This is the time. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Karina McCormick, and I'm a member of the tenant committee representing all of our 136 residents at the Riviera Mobile Home Park in Grants Pass. We were already had been working with CASA and was ready to make an offer. And then we heard that that some of the monies that were designated to help residents buy their own mobile home parks was cut, and we are lost. I mean, any option that we have right now is where our rents are going to be out there sky high, almost double for some people, and they just can't afford it here. We have quite a few low income people, and I know that homelessness is a huge thing that's happening right now. But I believe that without funding and helping us with this buy, is that we're going to have a lot more homeless, especially with older people that don't need to have this going on in their lives. It's really funny because the grant program was designed and mandated to help protect senior citizens from the homelessness. So I'm kind of confused why that would even be considered from not being able, because we've been working on this since last year. So I'm so sorry, I'm stumbling over myself. I just want to say that this is a great group of people. They work hard to maintain their park. They love it here, and they can afford it. If someone's spouses die, it's still okay.
Okay,
Oh,
we're at time.
Thank you so
for
much.
your input. Okay. Let's see. I believe, are we at Maria Orozco? Is she up next? I'm sorry.
Yes, that is
We're doing
correct.
a couple of different.
I'm
ones.
here.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay,
Go ahead.
very
please.
honored to present it. Okay,
I'm sorry.
can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, okay, I'm
Yes,
so
you can.
sorry. It's just so I'm very honored to present to my residents. I represent Tri-City Mobile Park, and I've been living about approximately 20 years plus in this residence. I'm a single mom of 3 kids. I raised my kids working in 3 jobs to be able to afford this home. And then right now, after we received the letter from the landlord saying they're going to sell the property, it's stating when this letter receive our community, we fear that we will be faced homelessness, and that we are in a need to find these reforms as a co-op, save our homes. Most of the residents live here are under Social Security, low income, and disabilities. Due to the inflation of the marketing being high, we find it challenging to find housing. Our children be at high risk to help their parents. Instead of in school, they will be like helping us to work and to provide everything as need. For love of our children, I would love to see my children continue in school and prepare and building better future for themselves instead having fear and being homeless. This is why we're as a community, we are asking for funds. We keep our homes and to be co-op to see our children through successful. Please consider grant funds in Oregon affordable housing tax credit. It helps the residents buy this park because like as many other community, like I said, they're under disability, there are a low income. We can't afford to get another house is due to the rents are so high. It is very difficult. Me as a single mom, raised 3 kids, it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you much for your input. I'm sorry, we're at time. Okay, next we have, if you could help me out here.
Shirley Wood is up next.
Okay,
Good morning.
go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm Shirley Wood. I'm also a member of the tenant committee representing all the 136 residents at Riviera Mobile Park, like Corrine McCormick, who you heard earlier. We had this one-time opportunity to buy this park as a cooperative, and we have a senior community here of 103 units that are older but well-maintained, and 80% of our seniors are between 70 and 90, and they do live on low fixed incomes. The fear of being displaced is running rampant throughout our park right now. There's no other affordable rentals in the high area if a company buys this park instead of us making it into a cooperative. Working with CASA, we did come up with an offer that was discussed with the seller in January. Then we found out there was going to be no funding for any of this new cooperative buys. And so we were unable to formally submit that offer. We only have 10 business days right now to submit an offer to the owner of the park, who would be receptive to us. 10 business days. All we need is for you folks to consider applying the funding to CASA so that CASA knows they have it, and then we can submit an offer subject to the funding in March. If there's any process that to be utilized to make that decision on how to do this, we absolutely need the opportunity to control the rents of the most vulnerable, the elderly. Last year, $45 million was budgeted. So I want to thank you for giving our request your immediate attention. It's in the best interest of economic security for all, as Governor Kotek has said. And I also want to give a special thanks to Stephanie at OHCS. She is the first one who reached out to us and acknowledged the letter we had written to the governor. And we had notified a number of agencies, state representatives, and also the federal senators and representatives too. So thank you very much for considering what we're asking for.
Okay, thank
If there's
you.
anything we can do to help,
Yeah.
please let us know.
We
But
will. We're
CASA.
at time now. Thank
Okay.
you for your input. And who have we got next?
What do you think?
Next, we have Bree Whitaker.
Okay, thank you. Bree Whitaker.
And I don't see a Bree Whitaker
How about
on.
Neil Whitaker?
I don't find Neil on the list either.
How about Amber Cook?
Yes, hi.
Go ahead when you're ready,
Okay.
please.
Good morning, Chair Hall and the Housing Stability Council. I first want to thank you for your discussion of the Julia West funding last month. No one who works in housing should be okay with housing properties being run in slum nuisance property conditions. That's not just the way it is in low-income housing. They exist because of a bizarre tolerance in housing authorities of developer landlords being able to make riches from providing uninhabitable housing. I was, of course, truly disappointed in your vote. Not the vote to create more affordable housing, we need that stat, but to do so without any expectation or accountability on how the developer landlord runs the current slumlight properties, and to make sure Julia West does not end up being another Milepost 5 or Rockwood Village. Sentencing another 100 marginalized people to live in filth and danger is not a win. Allowing hundreds more to keep living that way seems an incomprehensible failure to act. The owner of CDP told you and the public that we, the renters at and the neighbors of Milepost 5, are providing misinformation at these meetings. We've submitted hundreds of substantiating photos and testimonies, but of course are not allowed to present the documentation to the meeting participants and the public the way OHCS is enabling CDP to do via the monthly updates. When we submit tenant updates to OHCS, you pretend like they don't exist. Every month you substantiate what's written in the landlord's updates without getting proof of it, but suppress our documentation. If the state housing agency was the health department, they're allowing a big chain restaurant who has sent hundreds to the hospital with food poisoning to write their own health inspection reports in the monthly updates. Health inspection website with the health department official stamp as proof that the restaurant chain owners are doing a good job and should be allowed to stay open and expand. And the restaurant CEO allowed to claim that the sick customers were just making it all up. When will we renters be the ones getting help from the agency and the council instead of sacrifice to developer interest?
Okay, we're at
I-
time. Thank you
I
very
know
much.
several other people are on to give testimony, but they've been sent no link and are not being allowed on. So there's some kind of technical problem or issue. Thank you.
Okay. Cheola, any word on that? I guess any technical difficulties at OHCS's end with this?
The registration closes for the webinar 30 minutes prior. So if they have
Mhm.
signed up afterwards, we would not be able to capture that information.
Okay,
I still do not find Bree nor Neil Whitaker on the line. If you are used via phone only, then you will need to use the raise hand function of *9.
with that, we will move along.
We do have one person has raised their hand, Julie.
Okay, Julie, had you signed up to offer testimony?
No, this is actually Tracy Manning. I am using Julie's link. Hi, Mary.
Oh,
There is an issue with sign on. That's why I'm using Julie's link.
okay.
It does say on the registration that you need to sign up a certain amount of time in advance. I
Mhm.
don't know how long it said that, but in practical terms, that's never been the case. I always just sort of at 9:05 go, oh, shoot, and go sign up. And so I think people had a reasonable expectation they'd be able to get on, and you can't.
Let's see. Well, we are in the process, I would say, of kind of transitioning, updating our public comment, public input policies. We will have discussion of that later on in the meeting. I'm sorry that folks ran up against this. I don't have anything under chair's report, so we'll turn to Director Bell now for her report.
Yeah, good morning, Chair Hall, members of the council. I will yield this morning, and Chair Hall, if we, it's ultimately Chair's discretion, but if we have folks that are seeking to offer public input this morning and have ran into technical matters, I'm fine to defer that time so we can hear from folks.
We do have a few raised hands, Chair, if you'd like to continue.
I'll just go in the order I'm seeing them on the screen. Rose Ojeda.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to give the Housing Stability Council some context to the public comments from residents who are requesting additional GAP grant funding for park preservation and resident purchase. Since late December 2023, we have had 5 park resident groups approach CASA of Oregon requesting assistance with the purchase of their parks. Based upon previous biennium funding for park preservation at $45 million, we anticipated $15 to $25 million for park preservation beginning in 2024. We have learned, however, that only $5 million will be available. Our plan is to apply for refinancing of existing co-ops that will potentially exhaust the $5 million. That means no new GAP funding for park preservation in 2024. We have had to inform all the 5 park resident groups about the lack of grant funding in 2024 for their parks. They can proceed with the park purchase, but only with all debt financing that will significantly increase their rents. For 2 parks which had an analysis of their rent increase impact with all debt financing, the increases range from $400 to $724. We urge OHCS to consider additional gap funding for park preservation for existing parks for the biennium, and ideally for at least 2 parks that are currently under consideration. 1 park I think is at serious risk of park closure in Gladstone. We would request at least 15 million for these 2 parks, and these parks do represent about 100 spaces, impacting in the range of 400 to 450 individuals, including seniors and families with children. Thank you for your leadership and this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Brian Hoop.
Morning, Chair Hall and members of the council. My name is Brian Hoop, Executive Director of Housing Oregon. Oregon's affordable housing industry is navigating through a period of unprecedented challenges. The sector is reeling from the economic pressures of rising interest rates, increases in operating costs, and ongoing tailwinds of the COVID pandemic affecting rent arrears, and now the recent ice storms in January. Here are 3 themes Housing Oregon invites you to consider joining us as we prepare for next year's 2025 legislative long session. 1, OHCS needs to establish a resiliency fund to respond to damages sustained in natural disasters, including those affected by climate change. Brian Guinea with the HUD Oregon Field Office has compiled preliminary assessment numbers of the January ice storm damage. While the full cost of repairs is unknown, there will likely be at least $50 million in insurance claims across the region. He has received 24 anecdotal reports of properties experiencing structural storm damage or burst pipes and flooding. Over 100 residents had to be relocated to hotels or other units due to damaged homes. Second, we are exploring strategies to stabilize housing portfolios, continuing to experience persistent rent arrearages after the COVID pandemic and subsequent economic shocks resulting in skyrocketing operating costs. This concept could be modeled after a $50 million fund passed by the Minnesota legislature in 2023. Last, we applaud the 2023 legislature's approval of $9.7 million for pre-development supports. We will need a far larger and more flexible investment to ensure community-based developers, especially our culturally specific and smaller rural-based developers, will have sufficient capacity to succeed. Many organizations lack the deep coffers to purchase land, prepare projects, and hold them for several years before demonstrating they are ready to proceed under proposed new criteria. We want to work with the council, OHCS, and the legislature to help find solutions. Thanks.
Okay, Holly Benelli.
I did sign up for public comment, so I want to just make that clear. I'm not jumping in. My name is Holly Benelli. I am the Senior Asset Manager overseeing Milepost 5. I wanted to just share that I joined Community Development Partners in mid-December of 2023, and that prior to CDP, I was working for another nonprofit affordable housing owner and social service provider in East Multnomah County for about 9.5 years in their housing department. So I bring lots of experience working on site with residents and working with this kind of housing. I wasn't in attendance for the January 2024 Housing Stability Council meeting, and after hearing the public comments, felt compelled to join in a somewhat unorthodox way today and just introduce myself and reaffirm CDP's commitment to listening and responding to resident input. Even in this last month and a half, I've been able to join a monthly resident meeting that I understand has been taking place in the evenings, or it changed time for a few months, but with the residents since June of 2022, and have also made myself available over email, though we are still requesting all communication be routed through our property management site to ensure good control over process and procedures, and not to create triangulation in communication. I also want to make myself available to the council members for additional conversation related to this community. I understand that this is a challenging venue to have those conversations, and this is my primary focus. My primary focus is improving the community at Milepost 5 and maintaining the long-term sustainability. And a component of that is also responding to questions that anyone may have. So please feel free to reach out. I am here and available and located in Southeast Portland. So will travel. Thank you.
Thank you. Peggy Seiler.
Good afternoon. My name is Peggy Seiler, and I'm representing Tri-City Mobile Park. I am reading a letter also from one of our tenants, and it says, "Good morning. My name is Jay Shaw, and because of work obligations, I am unable to attend. My wife and I live in Space 24 Tri-City Mobile Park in Gladstone. We have lived here for 20 years plus. We have raised our kids here. We had an older daughter that had gotten sick, and so we moved in a new trailer in 2008. As we find this park a very homey and very welcoming, orientated, and we have many elder people on that are on Social Security and have lived in the park for 35 years plus. We have families in the park with children that have lived here for quite some time. We all own our own homes and our mortgage, and we pay mortgage also on these trailers. All the tenants in this park have received a letter for selling the park. We're all very scared. We have no idea if we will have a home in 6 months. So at this time, we are asking for some funding to help us purchase the park as a co-op. A lot of our residents are Spanish speaking. We have probably 60 to 70% that are bilingual and speak no English at all. This is going to be very, very devastating for this community. And Gladstone, we have, my mother moved here in 1979. I bought another trailer around the corner. My son lives in that trailer now, and I live in my mother's. I'm 67 years old. For me to pick my trailer up and move it somewhere, where am I going to move it to? And, this co-op is just really brought our whole community together.
Okay, we are at time.
Okay, so is that part of the letter? Now do I get my own spiel?
Pardon me?
Because we're just asking for some kind of assistance and some kind of help. Like I said, half of our, what happened there? Okay, got it.
Okay, we will ask staff to follow up with you and the other folks from this park. I imagine they're already in communication, but everybody on that topic and other issues, thank you very much. Let's see, Director Bell, did you have a report, or do I remember you saying you would yield time?
That's correct, Chair Hall. I don't have a report this morning, but I do want to reaffirm the commitment and action that you stated that we will be following up today on this.
Okay, Councilmember Lee?
Thank you, Chair Hall. I'm wondering if we can request from staff at our next meeting or in between this meeting and that meeting, a briefing on 2 issues, one of which is the issue of the mobile home park issue that has been raised by public comment, and secondarily, the thinking about the damage from the recent weather and any ideas that staff have or are working on. So if we could get a briefing on both of those next month, or I know it doesn't fit time-wise, or in between, I'd really appreciate being educated and hearing more about what staff is thinking about these 2 issues in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris.
Thanks, Chair Hall. I just wanted to echo that request. That's exactly what I was thinking as well. So it's that's all I wanted to know.
Okay. Councilmember Meehan.
Just in spite of the time here, I also echo Chair Lee and Chair Harris, but I also would like to thank Holly Benelli for reaching out as a senior asset person for CDP and getting herself in the loop. So I'd love to make contact with her at some point as well. Thank you.
Okay. This time, I believe we're at the presentation of the affordable rental housing division. And team, are you ready? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. Thought somebody had their hand up that I hadn't responded to, but anyway, so multifamily. Let's have you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. Nice to see you this morning. This is Natasha Detweiler Davy, Affordable Rental Housing. Appreciate and thanks for the public comment this morning that we heard. I do know that we have heard outreach around this park as was reflected in the public comment through the governor's office outreach, and we'll just so acknowledge that. And later in my agenda, we will be talking about the draft resource attribution for resource investments of our development resources, which are currently not open yet. So that is, and this is not finalized. We've put those together. And we have a big agenda here for you this morning. So I will kick it off here with Ty Dunson-Strain, who will be presenting 2 projects for consideration, and I will share screen. Go ahead, Ty.
Got going. Good morning, members of the council, Director Bell, here, Ty Dunson-Strain, AD of transactions here, joined by Hattie Ayatt, production manager, and note that she recently was promoted to that role. So we're super excited that we're growing internally and growing out the bench, and so wanted to acknowledge that. Real quick, I see a minor so the project overview, this is typo,
Wrong project list, apologies.
that's
this one's right.
Yeah, that's on me. So Kafori Court, sponsored by PCRI Community, Portland Community Reinvestment Funds. This has been a great project to see through in fruition. I want to give my sincere thanks for the team over at PCRI for shepherding this through. It's been a village to raise an affordable housing project, and this is one clear example of that. So wanted to state that for the members. So with that, it's a 40 unit permanent supportive housing project consisting of a range of studios and 1-bedrooms with afforded 30% AMI units, and also PSH capital dollars that OHCS has provided. And the total project cost is a little over $28 million, and PCRI is going to be partnering with Northwest Pilot Project and the Black community of Portland nonprofit PC Portland Black Community Nonprofit. There's also going to include case management services, support specialists, and the referrals are going to be all coming through Multnomah County Coordinated Access System. And the MWSB targets, PCRI is committed to achieving a 30% MWSB target of 30%. And the project supports our multiple priorities with our statewide housing plan: equity and racial justice, affordable rental housing, permanent supportive housing, and homelessness. And next is our equity and racial project kind of matrix that kind of outlines the where the project is at the current state, and that's included in your packet. And I'll pause now if we want to take questions for this project, or continue on to the next project.
Council members, what's your preference? Councilmember Mannion.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just want to echo Spin Director Duxon in terms of PCRI, and I think the project's been in plans for 15 years and multiple submissions through the city, through the state, and to finally see it getting off the ground is just speaks to the effort and work and desire and vision that PCRI has in its leadership. So congratulations.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers.
Good morning, Chair Hall and other members. I didn't know this project had been in the works for 15 years, but this would be a major accomplishment to see it on the table today. I just have a question about an acronym that I'm not familiar with. So under the NWESB target, you also have /SDVBE, and I'm wondering, what does that mean?
So small disabled veteran-owned businesses. I think I have that. Yeah, I think I have that correct, but
I think Roberto will validate here.
Yes, that's
acronyms are all over. So yes. Sorry,
Yes.
Roberto, go for it.
No, I was just going to say that, yes, that's correct. It's small disabled veteran enterprises. Yeah.
Yeah, service disabled. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess for just additional context on that, the MWSB and I think we'll actually next month have Claudia Cantu come with, she's the MWSB initiative owner, and to share some information updates around our MWSB effort. And so I think she will be our technical expert that will be able to explain all of the things and the inner workings. But it is a registry component and categorization that is tied to that COVID process. So excited to be able to bring that conversation along with you next month. I think Ty, for time, I think not seeing other hands, we can move forward to Pacific Flats.
So Pacific Flats is in is in Phoenix. It's a 72-unit project sponsored by Commonwealth companies. That includes a range of unit sizes and affordabilities. It was previously awarded LIFT funds, and this project is going to be constructed in the fire zones of Phoenix. So this is also a great project to see units getting rebuilt in that region. The Commonwealth has signed MOUs with the natives of One Wild Indigenous Alliance, and has signed an MOU with the County Community Action Agency Access. The target for this project is for the MWSB target is 20%, and the project supports three of the statewide housing goals: equity and racial justice, affordable rental housing, and rural communities. And here on this slide, we provide just a project status update to further detail how this aligns with our equity and racial justice goals.
But I think before we move to consideration of the resolution, I think if Housing Stability Council has any questions on Pacific Flats.
Council? All right, I guess. Wait, Councilmember Meehan.
So, pardon me if I missed it, but do we know who the property management structure is for, or who it is for these two properties? And is there a reason why the property management on one property, it seems like there's a lot of cultural diversity and there's a lot of, BIPOC leadership and whatnot, and this, on the Pacific Flats, it doesn't seem like there's very much going on there, and I'm just kind of curious if it's targeting Indigenous people. I don't know. So I'm just wondering about the actual property management, for these properties.
Yeah, so I think on Kafori Court, we can, do we have, I don't have that directly in front of me. On Hattie, do you mind pulling that piece up? I know on Pacific Flats, they're self-managing, so that's Commonwealth Company, and on the on the leadership, the leadership of the structure, they have MOUs in place with service providers that are culturally specific organizations, and then structure wise, these are the development team represented what their current leadership is from a diversity standpoint.
That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, thank you. And if you would like additional follow-up, I think we can take that and follow up after the meeting. Thank you as well.
Any other questions or feedback from the council? Well, is somebody ready to make the motion as presented on page 9 of the meeting packet PDF?
So moved.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Thank you, Council Chair Hall. For the record, Councilmember Mena has now joined. Councilmember DeFantorum,
Enthusiastic yes for both. Thank you.
Councilmember Farrell,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mena,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Harris,
Yes.
Councilmember Meehan,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes.
Thank you, Council. Motion passes.
Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you so much. And I think, that conversation also reminded me, I think just acknowledge the great amount of work, persistence, and stick-to-itiveness that development takes. And I think both of those projects being notes in that column, and is really exciting to be in a collaborative place to be able to support the work. And so next we are revisiting a conversation from last month around mixed income rulemaking. And so I have Britt McLean and Rick Ruzicka of our policy and planning group. I see Mitch on screen as well. So I think we've got the dream team here of planning and policy to bring forward these next two discussions. Mixed income ruling, I think, as Britt will check back in with you, this is a statute update and the rule and the intention of this is to be able to give us greater flexibility. And it is not deciding or making changes around our funding. So it is, again, around trying to lean into flexibility to allow more options as we're deploying resources, but not making the decisions about how we do that. And so with that, I think Britt will hand it off to you, or you and the team.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha. I'm so sorry. I see a black box for my camera. Can folks see me?
Nope, you are off screen, but we can hear you. So I think that is fine.
All right, I'll just move forward. So sorry about that. Good morning and nice to see you again, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. For the record, my name is Britt McLean, and I'm an operations and policy analyst here in affordable rental housing. I'm back today to present a revised staff recommendation for the rule change in our mixed income development financing statute. Mitch Hanoush, our senior operations and policy analyst, is here again for questions and to manage the slides this time. I'll start with a brief reorientation of the topic, share the revised staff recommendation, then members can discuss and ask questions, and then finally council members will vote. Next slide, Mitch. Just as a reminder, the definition for mixed income housing is the one that we use and that's currently in Oregon statute. Again, mixed income developments restrict rents on certain units so that tenants within a wider income range can afford to reside within the development. Next slide. Thanks, Mitch. We'll just do a quick overview of the request for approval today, just as a reminder. The current rule says that OHCS may not finance any affordable units in mixed income developments unless 2/3 of the total units in that development are restricted to tenants making 120% AMI and below. OHCS was given the authority to reconsider the policy during the 2023 legislative session with House Bill 2761. Legislative sponsors and advocates want the agency to move toward fostering an expansion of mixed income developments across the state. Again, OHCS supported this approach on the record, and a link to our written testimony is in the memo of your council packet. We want to clarify that we are not presenting you with a program, but rather just a simple rule change in the way that we fund affordable units within developments, and that also contain market rate units. All of our policy objectives, program rules, compliance, and all of those requirements still apply. This rule update will simply allow more types of projects to have the ability to seek OHCS funding. Next slide. So here is our revised recommendation based on feedback we received from council in January. At January's council meeting, members shared concerns that the recommendation did not meet expectations as a threshold for funding consideration. Staff heard council members express interest in a percentage minimum that could create more flexibility for projects of various sizes, while maintaining a reasonable expectation for the number of affordable units that these mixed income developments deliver with our state investment. We're seeking approval to establish a minimum standard of either 5 units or 10% of total units, whichever is greater, rounding up. And another reminder that OHCS would only fund the affordable units within any mixed income development. Next slide. Staff believe this is our best opportunity to achieve some of our shared priorities: more affordable units built, a clear, flexible, and simplified approach for our partners, and more access to units in more developments in more neighborhoods for tenants. Because it aligns most effectively with our current policy, it ensures ease of implementation with a minimum unit number that coincides with our current minimum number for multifamily housing developments. It allows developers across the state to include regulated affordable units in a wider range of developments, including projects that have been exclusively market rate under the restrictions of the current rule. And it enables responsiveness to local market conditions, community priorities, and the availability of other funding. It also enables responsiveness to excuse me, sorry about that. Under this new standard, smaller developments with mixed income units will continue to have the ability to access OHCS resources, allowing them to attain capital upfront for their project and offering some stability throughout the affordability period, while having the operational advantages that come with higher rents associated with market rate units that are often required to make projects sustainable in the long term, particularly in rural communities. Overall, we believe this new standard will allow for more opportunities for low-income families and expansion of our developer pool and proliferation of our mission, as well as our program requirements integrated into more developments. Next slide, Mitch. For our equity and racial justice considerations, again, staff believe that this revised recommendation and increasing access to housing opportunities in mixed income developments in general is the best opportunity to apply the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion goals and racial justice commitments to projects and organizations where those opportunities didn't previously exist. OHCS will continue to require affirmative fair housing marketing plans for all affordable units funded. Regional NWESD participation goals are in effect, and other policy objectives specific to the resources we administer. Next slide. We really appreciate the time and welcome any comments or feedback and questions you may have before voting. Thank you.
Council, any questions or feedback on this? Councilmember Harris.
Yeah, thank you thank you, Chair Hall, and thank you for the presentation. That was really informative. I just have two questions. One is in notes in the packet that OHCS will track the impact of the new policy and provide updates to council. And I'm just curious if you all have discussed what those checkpoints will be so we can anticipate updates.
Yeah, that's a great question, council member. And actually, I missed a part of my there was a part in my talking points here that I neglected to mention, and I also didn't mention it in my first presentation, which I meant to. That this process for approving our rule change for financing mixed income developments is in statute now, so we have the ability to revisit this rule if it's not working, if we're not getting an adequate return on investment for the resources we put into mixed income developments. We can come back to you and have a discussion about that and change change the standard, which is great. It's great to have that process in statute that's always there. So if the council members are nervous about this standard, please know that we will track it. We will we'll be able to track what can be delivered with this new standard, and then we can report back to council and always change it if it's not working.
Yeah, and I think, Britt, I would also want to add to that. I think that this is, I think we have all of those flexibilities. There's not like a moment when we do or do not have latitude to update rules. And so I think we can always initiate a rulemaking process when it is something that we identify as a need. I think in terms of standing up our new, like all of our work to change in the system, our future state, I think I've talked a bit about, and I'll talk more about this today as well, but I think wanting to know, we'll be making this evolution. It, will not be perfect. We will need to evaluate and iterate as we move forward if we're not either seeing the process work as we need it to, but also if we're not seeing the impacts that we are hoping to get. And I think part of that is going to include a dashboard, a lot, where we're keeping up to date where current reservations of resources are, what the status of those is, I think, and what the unit production is related to where we're putting resources to make sure that if we, for instance, think 25% of resources should go over here, we think that we should get 25% of units. So wanting to make some of those direct ties, I think reflecting in our as we are examining and like sharing kind of default, including a lens on that and a place of looking at what are any of these mixed income projects and what does that look like? Are we expanding because of this ability, or is it not being impactful? And I think a lot of that is really around alignment into market opportunities, especially in this case of mixed income. And so I think on an ongoing basis, quarterly, we'll be looking at that internally. I think for Housing Stability Council, I would think that that's part of an annual check-in with you all. And if we're seeing a thing happen that is impeding our ability to do the work that we are agreeing to do here, then we would bring it more in advance of that. But otherwise, I think on an annual basis, would want to be checking in on impacts of our policies with Housing Stability Council.
Great, thank you. That's all really helpful. And other quick question was that on page 19, it states that the financing will only go towards the portion of the rent restricted units. And I am just curious how that is also tracked. Being in the design and construction industry, we oftentimes look at the building holistically. And I'm just curious how that is portioned out for specifically the rent restricted units. Not something that necessarily has to be answered now, but if there's any materials or information on that.
Yeah, I think that we can do that as a follow-up item for you. And it is from like the legal structures behind it in terms of condo structures that you need to apply to be able to segregate
affordable versus others. There's some, I think there's information that we can share to provide that kind of context of the back end financials on the holistic building, which you're right, needs to be approached as a whole.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Other council questions or feedback? Councilmember Mania.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just want to express my appreciation to the staff on the feedback and coming back with something that seems that it definitely works in terms to maximize the number of units, affordable units that we can help with. So thank you.
Chair Hall, if I may just add a couple of quick things. I didn't formally raise my hand. I'm jumping in line here, so hopefully I haven't got in front of anybody. I appreciate all of the conversation on this. A couple of very sort of specific things that I want to signal for council as we have engaged in a lot of conversations that I think have signaled and have pointed to areas where the agency is stepping into either the creation of new tools, establishing new tools, using the existing tools differently in order to solve issues pertaining to creating more housing, protecting and preserving more housing. And I want to just signal that this is one of the ways that we are doing this, and also signal that part of the request that we will have of council, that we want the council to be thinking about and quite frankly direct us on is as we're testing new tools, as we're trying new things and tracking the outcomes to see if things are, if we're actualizing, if we're seeing the outcomes, and or if we're not, and we need to come back to the drawing board on things. We also want to hear from council on how council wants to be engaged beyond some of the, excuse me, beyond some of the cadence of updates that we are proposing. So I would suggest that it is just a proposal and that we would want to hear from council if there needs to be other forms of engagement to make sure that the council is fully tracking and wrapping their head around not only what we're doing, but how we're doing it. And then I would also just signal as well for probably forthcoming series of conversations is for this particular talking, we're talking about mixed income development. We're talking about resources that are going into rent restricted units, but there is an eventuality where the agency is going to need to expand into market rate to think about workforce housing. I think we recognize that when we talk about affordable housing, the market has shifted in such a way, and there is a reality where that reach of affordability is impacting a lot of households beyond those that have lower incomes. And so I think we also have to think about our role and responsibility in that. And so I want to just signal that as a place of growth and maneuverability that we will need and have to engage on, or what are the tools and responsibilities for us in that as too. So I want to just expressly signal that as well, even though we're not quite going there today. Thank you, Chair Hall.
Okay, Council Member Meehan.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Director Bell and council members. I just really wanted to thank and acknowledge the work that's got to be done for coming up with this flexible plan to include mixed income developed financing, and to also reiterate the point of Director Bell. There are a ton of families out there that are just right over that income level, and definitely you know, our one transmission going out from disaster, but beyond the low income or affordable, what we consider affordable rents or affordable units today, as far as their income level. So they just make too much money, but just not enough money, but just too much. So I do appreciate and respect all the work that gets done for this. And I like the idea of it being flexible and having council be able to get feedback and reports on that. So thank you very much.
Okay, anything else from council? Now, am I correct? This is not a decision item, or?
It is.
It is. a decision
Yeah, I
item.
believe we have a motion.
Oh, that's right. Okay. And we have that in the packet, I believe.
Maybe I'm jumping Chair Hall. So moved as presented.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Lee.
I second.
Thank you. And a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum,
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mena,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Harris,
Yes.
Councilmember Meehan,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Great job, everybody.
Great.
And
Thank you so much, Housing Stability Council. And next up, we're really excited to be able to connect the worlds and bring to you the Raise Up Oregon report. And I'm gonna just hand it off to Mitch and Chelsea to talk about that effort and share with you all today.
Hey, all. Mitch Hanush, Senior Policy Analyst for Affordable Rental Housing. And yeah, Chelsea and I are mostly just here to hand it off to Sue, but I don't see, is Sue on the call yet?
Let me check the list.
I think we might have told
She
her.
is not on the, let me see if she used a different link.
If not, I'm wondering maybe if we switch order of things and I can switch transition to the funding process discussion and while we have give Sue a time to join.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't find her on the list.
Okay, so you can go track her down and we can take the time here to have this conversation on our funding process and recommendation. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hello, Housing Stability Council. This is Natasha Detweiler Davy. So to this it's still morning. This morning, wanting to just take a second to check in, do a process check-in with you all around what we're doing and what we're working toward, and the current status of recommendations, then dig in as a follow-up to our last month's conversation around resource distribution, and then introduce concepts around cost controls before finalizing with next steps. So as a high-level process check-in, we have been engaging over at least the last 6 months. I think it's been a bit longer than that, around our overall resource offering structure within affordable rental housing. I've deconstructed all of our engagement on that to get input on these all of the different components. We have been transitioning those into recommendations. Our goal is to be able to open a new centralized application in April, in the early spring. In order to do that, will be some frameworks that we need Housing Stability Council to adopt and approve. Other details are things that are being informed by all of the conversations that we have been having to date. So next month, my hope is that you have in your Housing Stability Council packet initial recommendations for your input on, and then we would be bringing those back in April to finalize. In the meantime, as we have been drafting, we are iterating, we're bringing information back from both you and development stakeholders as we're continuing the engagement process, which is where we will end today's conversation. So to just regroup on what we've been kind of coalescing towards in terms of recommendations is the centralized application process that is not competitive, but it establishes standards. So we evaluate based on standards. We are programming resources into a pipeline aligned process where we're giving conditional commitments at different steps of that process, with final funding commitments coming in later than we see them today. We are offering and prioritizing support for smaller and lesser resourced organizations with pre-development funding, standing up a new technical advisor team, and we'll be aligning capacity resources into this structure as well. We are working toward, I think from a value standpoint, our most time, effort, and energy should be invested in not competing for resources, but making sure that resources get to community. And so moving projects forward is a key performance factor of evaluating that impact. And then we are talking about having deliberate and responsive set-asides to make sure that we have geographic equity and that we are making intentional efforts to address systemic inequity impacts. And this is, I won't belabor it, I've showed you this many times. Again, the translation is taking the NOFA process from this one interaction to deconstructing it to be a more relationship aligned. It doesn't require projects to slowly walk through. So if a project is ready to go through all of the evaluation components, they can. But if they are, and I think we'll have some of those as projects have been working on these for years already, but as we are onboarding new, imagine that we'll have more walking through that process. I introduced last month for discussion this development resources draft. And this is showing essentially the alignment to where the bulk of our resources are being recommended to be dedicated. Again, this is getting input on this to inform final recommendations. And I think a kind of a critical distinction from how we used to approach resources is we are looking here not to slice and dice every resource into a policy alignment, but we're making them broadly available. And then we'll meet the projects where they are, which I think is an opportunity to expand production and impact. And it is also, then puts a different type of pressure on the set-asides in terms of what are the things that we are wanting to intentionally make sure we accomplish with these. For the large part, the alignment of those development resources that you see in that calendar are really production aligned. And so almost the majority of them, and I'll flip back to the chart, but a majority of our resources are in this general development capital bucket. And so oops, wrong direction. So we're looking at, supporting, and that doesn't mean that it needs to be one flavor of project. So it could be a project to serve a specific target population, but it comes in to that umbrella. We did include therein those production dollars, like flexible development funding to be specifically dedicated to tribal resources. And then otherwise have 3 resources that are population dedicated. So one is our permanent supportive housing resources dedicated to chronic homelessness. We have veterans dedicated resources, and we have ag worker housing dedicated resources. Other than that, we have $50 million in preservation investments from the state legislature. And so I've allocated that between supporting at-risk affordable housing investments, rental housing investments, and then the manufactured park preservation, which is part of what we heard today in public comment is around that specific touch point. So these are all of the different areas that we have aligned resources on what we used to call our funding calendar, since it is the idea is that when we are opening our application, all of those resources are available to be secured into first conditional and then final funding commitments for projects. I think calendar has become confusing to call that. So it's the 2024 development resources. So this is where we have alignment. And so then further abilities are to target resources to specific policy objectives. And the way that we are setting up and positioning ourselves to want to do that is through the use of set-asides. And when I'm kind of thinking about those set-asides and wanting to reconcile back to the why of those set-asides, I think that we are identifying two key needs within set-asides to further target resources to policy objectives. First of those is to respond to impacts of systemic inequities and inequalities. And so that meaning that We are wanting to disrupt the systems that have served to prevent wealth building among organizations that are led by and serve BIPOC communities and has limited full access and services to BIPOC community, as well as lacking resource investment to rural communities. And that is the vein through which that set aside, and that is the how or the why. The how is the 25% set aside with dedicated access to culturally specific organizations and small nonprofit development in rural communities. The second why is production statewide. Why we want to make sure that development doesn't just happen in one community, but that there are opportunities and access statewide to make sure that we can have impact for Oregonians across the state. We don't have resources to build in every single city or every single town, so acknowledge that, but that we need to have some metrics to make sure that we are serving statewide. So translating those hows into policy, last month we talked about this, the 25% development set aside, and got some, kind of early feedback from Housing Stability Council of not being quite sure that that is enough. And so I think we've made a couple of refinements to this since last month in response to that, as well as other stakeholder input. I think first making the decision that instead of that 25% set aside being pulled within each region, that we want to pull that off the top. So taking, and apologies for the flipping back. So if we're looking at this full around $540 million in resources for development, we want to look at all of that and say 25% of that we want to pull off to support development in that set aside. We've also made the refinement that it is not nonprofit organizations that are eligible, but small nonprofits doing work in rural communities. So it's specifically trying to narrow that focus so it's more precise about who is able to access that set aside. And I also want to be clear, because this has been a theme of our conversations, as well, in particular with development stakeholders, that it is not any organization in a project that is culturally specific or a nonprofit that triggers ability to do this. Part of this intentional desire, like the why of this, is to make sure that we are giving resources to historically impacted and systemically impacted organizations, culturally specific organizations with BIPOC leaders, BIPOC missions. And so where those organizations are in partner with another developer, and the other developer is going to be getting the bulk of the resources from that is wonderful, and they should be accessing the regional resources. Where these organizations are financial partners, are benefiting from the financial flow of resources, the ongoing revenue of the projects, that should be derived from the set aside. And so we'll need to be explicit about that, about defining that. And again, not wanting to lessen the ability for organizations to partner to get the work done. It is not the case that every organization should be doing development in order to have housing to serve their populations. But it is the case that I think the role of that, if we're thinking about the why, it is about getting that financial resource. So then we go into the regional set asides, development resources allocated to 3 regions across the state. To ensure some geographic distribution of resources. Last month, I brought forward our initial recommendation that is aligned with the state's Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and based on the % of the total housing needs in the state. And so you can see the distribution of those and the labels to cross compare. I think one of the inputs that I have had over the last month has been, whether is it the right metric to use the state's total housing need, or should we be looking at the state's data on underproduction? And so you can see the different impacts of that data choice in there. And it's a pretty weighty question, so I wrote it on the slide, thinking it helps all brains process in it here. And I think happy also to have follow-up discussions. I think it is, a question that I am really interested. I'm interested in feedback on all of the things. I'm really very much interested in your feedback on this question, which is, should we be, when we are allocating to regions, doing a making a data decision based on underproduction, wanting to make sure that we're acknowledging and reflecting the underproduction and the impact of those historic disinvestments. In the regional set-asides, acknowledging that we are also doing that with a 25% set aside, where we are trying to also push resources where we have seen historic lack of investment. And so I think there is no right answer. I think that there are, it works in all of the different ways, but I'm wanting to understand how Housing Stability Council insight on that is, does one or the other feel better? Do we average them, say 50% weight to each factor? Or what are the, your thoughts? And I am pausing here for conversation. I see Councilmember DeFontorum.
All right, go ahead, please, Counselor.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Natasha, for your presentation, and I hope I'm not preempting anything here.
No.
I do like the proposal. I think there's one other element beyond just lack of production that might be considered, and that is how many applications that haven't been funded by small rural or culturally specific applicants are in these particular areas. I think that tells a story in itself. So my question before this slide was kind of reflecting on the public testimony this morning. There were 2 manufactured home parks that provided testimony. One was looking for funding or support in Grants Pass to purchase as a co-op their mobile home park. Where in this budget is that embedded?
Yes, thank you so much for highlighting that. So on this, you'll see that we have aligned $5 million to manufactured park preservation in this draft calendar. And so we've been seeking feedback on this calendar and haven't, I think, are beginning to get some of that roll in on this front as well. The total legislative investment for preservation was $50 million. And so we see that resource broke out here, $40 million to fund affordable rental housing. And so those would be projects at risk of loss, subsidized housing at risk of loss because they are either, expiring or have an extreme need for rehab or other, risk of loss by either expiry or physical condition issues that they are navigating. And then the other $5 million is reflected down here in portfolio stabilization. And this is a framework that Housing Stability Council has adopted to be able to work with, to create tools to work with our existing portfolio projects where maybe it's not a comprehensive rehab, but there needs to be an intervention to solve some ongoing struggling financial conditions. And so those are the dedicated preservation resources. The other place that we have some ability to move resources could be reflected in the general housing account program resources. However, the flexible place of that, the bulk of those resources that we have available are being dedicated into the tribal dedicated set aside as resources that are able to be invested on tribal trust land. So those are the mechanics. And again, we are this is not final. Again, over the next 2 months in March and then April is when we will be finalizing what this is. We don't have any open offerings right now, so we don't have resources offered. Nobody has submitted an application that has been declined. So those are, and if this is, again, a few months early from when we would be able to provide any project funding.
Okay, a quick follow-up if I may, Mary Lee. Oh, thank you. Because I see you're next in line and I don't want to jump in front of you. So the 2 different lines of public comment around manufactured parks suggest that they're both trying to purchase. I didn't hear if they had applied and I didn't hear how much financial support they were seeking. So my 2 questions. One, I heard that there would be follow-up with both of these groups today, probably. so if they haven't applied, are we able to assist them in an application? And secondarily, I guess, is this going to be enough? Not knowing how much they're seeking, that's 2 in the universe that we're hearing from. I'm guessing there's probably more. $5 million doesn't seem like enough funding.
Yeah, I think Councilmember DeFentorum, I think those are my follow-up questions. We have not gotten any applications nor have any idea of the number, the resource number that those specific parks are needing. We have not had an application process open, so have not received an application. Traditionally and often parks will use bridge financing that NOAA offers to be able to acquire properties while they seek final resources. So I think that will also be another question around the ties specifically to this future funding that hasn't been finalized. Thanks.
Okay. Was that all, Councilmember DeFentorum? Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I actually would love to ask a follow-up question to Councilmember DeFentorum, and then I have a response for you, Natasha, on your question about which way to go. So just so I clarify, part of why we're going in this direction is to, where possible, loosen these constrictions of this is a blank project, and this is a blank project, and this is a blank project. So while we have manufactured park preservation capital there at that amount, there may be other pots of money that would be available to bring into a sort of sausage package when and if we got the proposal in the timeline and the proposal met our values and approach and our strategy. Is that correct?
Yeah, to a large degree, yes. I do think manufactured park preservation is a different type of investment in that the general development is to create new units and to create new affordable housing opportunities. And manufactured park preservation is preservation because it's really naturally occurring affordable housing. And so the idea is not, the impact is to ensure that that existing affordable housing supply in communities continues to be an existing supply in communities. Which is a different mechanic than bringing new units into affordable housing space. And so I think that's where there is an eligibility distinction and where it's been approached through the preservation lens.
What I would offer, and we've had this conversation, I think, over the years, when we are converting these parks from a single owner, ownership to the ownership of the people living there, it is also addressing some of our other policy targets related to economic justice and building equity from people who are in rental, if you will, situations. And so I think there's a nuance here for these projects that we've talked about, again, for a long time, of trying to figure out how do we braid policy agenda and targets with the functional technical work of, yes, these are naturally occurring, we want them to stay, but they're not new, they're not providing additional, right? And when we convert to ownership by the people who are there and the equity that starts to accrue then, and all of the other secondary benefits we get, we can think of them, I think, in some ways as a new place, because of these additional things that we're having, the additional benefits that we're gaining. So I would just say that's some food for thought for me as I heard both the conversation and as I understand where we're trying to go with this policy. So in response to your question, the under over, actually I want to offer under or over. So I like the idea of where we are underrepresented in terms of production, because I think we know there's a sort of complicated number of factors about why there's underproduction, but it doesn't make a difference about why if you're living in those areas and can't get affordable housing, right? I think I would want us to think about this idea of both underproduction and overrepresentation of people of color in homelessness, lack of affordable housing, those pieces. And I say this because I'm incredibly proud of the work that you all are doing to think about this set aside for racial justice and equity, and also geographic equity. That is not to say that none of those type of projects could come into this 75%, right? It is not meant to be exclusionary. And thus, we have to offer a racial justice and equity lens into that 75. So if there was some way to say, where is there underproduction and how does that intersect with an over representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color individuals, households, and communities in homelessness, in marginalized housing, in affordable housing, that would, I think, get me to a place of comfort with how to prioritize or allocate for the 75. And I think I'll just close by saying, this is phenomenal work. This is phenomenal work, and I cannot applaud you, Natasha, and the staff. It's taken so many years to get here, and it's probably one of the biggest things we're going to do. And I appreciate so much the regularity. Earlier, I said, yeah, you've seen this chart a couple times. Yeah, I need to see that chart every single month, I think, right? In order to understand what we're doing. I think the briefing has been great. I think the ability to engage with us has been amazing. And as we're both looking in this new direction, which I think is foundational and wonderful, we're also practicing with each other, staff and the council, how we look at these bigger picture items, how we try to get to a larger agenda and get our elevation out over the particular projects that we deal with every month. And so I just want to say thank you. It's entirely inspiring and moving to me to see the way you are leading this and the way that the staff team is working on it. I know it's breathtakingly difficult, and I think you all are doing a great job, and I'm so appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Lee. And yes, it is a huge lift, and I will forever be grateful to the team. I will also, I think you flagged a really critical point for me. I think, as I was going through the why of all of the different policies, I think it is that set aside is not our way of the primary strategy of serving BIPOC community and embedding equity and racial justice in our work. All projects need to be responsive, if not already culturally specific. And so that is incumbent on all partners to do as they are doing development. And that culturally specific set aside is really about that specific place of alignment. And I will leave my response there. I appreciate so much the feedback. And I see Councilmember Farrell's hand is raised.
You're up.
I totally agree, and I applaud this work, and know it's been a lot and for a long time. And if this has already been provided, then just let me know. But as I think about the comments that Councilmember Lee had around overrepresentation, underrepresentation, and like percentage set-asides, I'm just curious if there's a graphic that shows these regions overlaid with the demographic information. So we can see that this is where there's overrepresentation or underrepresentation with the target populations you're trying to reach.
I think we'll do that as a follow-up and bring that for next month's conversation. Is really helpful to understand what things you want to help inform the decision. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Meehan.
I just have to echo, Councilmember Lee, I feel like sometimes that I didn't express that to you, but I appreciate you talking about how I feel. Thank you so much, Natasha, and all the team and staff. I mean, what a bunch of a huge amount of work, nice pivot table and some graphics. That's going to be great. I do appreciate the work that you're doing. One of the questions, one of the things that came up for me is that when we were talking about the mobile home parks, which I also appreciate the fact that that came up. I heard that lady talk about 10 days over there at the Ridgefield there in Grants Pass, 10 days and the co-op and CASA, and we were right there, and they proved it, or they, said that they would be interested. The owner was going to be interested. And so I do really appreciate the fact that the agency is going to follow up with those folks and try to figure something out. And I like the idea of having some flexibility, but it would be really nice to see that trends where the 75% also it kind of hits that consideration for the investment on rural property versus ONA or in collaboration with what the Oregon Housing Needs Assessment is. So thank you so much for your guys' work. Appreciate it.
Great. Okay, so I have another topic to transition to. So I'm going to move it into this. So that was regrouping on last month. We will bring it back again as I incorporate and follow up on that discussion. Really, again, appreciate it. Another big thing that we are needing to really reconcile with to have a strategy around is cost controls and oversight. And I think previously would have talked about this as subsidy limits. And I think to be honest, this is one of the main things that a lot of developers are trying to understand now. And so this is the reveal of a very early draft of this right now. So these are not final. This is conceptual. So caveat that across all of this. So as we know, we are transitioning from a competitive structure into a standards-based evaluation that has so many impacts to how we have implemented our programs in the past. In the past, we would have a up to amount for a subsidy limit, and you would be able to put points to it. And you would say, if you need max points, max resources, you get less points in your application. You are less competitive than one that needs lesser subsidy. So we are not going to be able to use that as a structure, and candidly, intentionally, we need to make sure that we are being able to be market responsive. So when we are, again, putting projects into our development queue, accepting them at different stages in the process and finalizing final funding commitments a little bit later, we already have been agreeing with them all along until that final number. So we have metrics and ways to hold resources through that process. So we're not doing agreements to give resources we won't have, but we will not have that lever of you needed this and you got this many points in it. And so it is balancing that predictability and clarity with needing to be responsible and accountable stewards of public resources to make sure that we have equivalency, predictability for developers to do their work. And I think that starts to put a lot of different pressure on the kind of cost structure of projects, and that subsidy itself cannot be the one way that we think about approaching that work. So I think what we're drafting here, the concept is to build cost controls and approach that from 3 different perspectives: subsidy limit, but also cost evaluation and policy controls. And so in terms of cost evaluation, thinking that is giving us discrete and deliberate ability to evaluate the reasonability of cost. There is no one answer to what the right cost is for a project. Every project has 1,000 influencing factors around what those cost impacts will be. What is the land? What kind of structure needs to be underground, above ground? Where is it located? What is the population you're serving? How many stories is it? What are you building it? So many. It's impossible to be specific about it. But we do need to have something that lets us say, is this reasonable? And so what we're recommending that we do is use a statistical predictive cost model that will provide really baseline evaluation of total project development costs. This is a model that Minnesota has implemented. We've been able to connect back with their research team and statisticians who use that model. We have our policy team is looped in our research and economists to be able to think about using that strategy to be able to evaluate projects when they're coming in. Are they within the anticipated costs? If they are, that's great. If they are higher than that statistical model predicts they should be, then asking to have a third-party cost justification provided. And noting that all of that will require a lot of details. What does that mean? I think would want to be aligning into industry standards, using something that exists in the marketplace versus creating a whole new product on the side. We want to continue to require detailed cost estimates and tracking of project cost to detailed line items. And so we have right now aligned with that uniform schedule of values. And then the other part of this recommendation is to require a value engineering analysis. And I think I need to probably be more specific, as I've started to try to talk about what the reason for that is not to strip away everything from projects, but really to just have an eye on that through the project life, and really affirmatively flag what feels like no, it is not okay to remove the playground from the project that is a family project. And you're saying that that is a key amenity to serve your target population, but also to say, okay, when the thing comes up, when the cost has gone up and your budget starts to not work anymore, what are the places we already know that we want to tweak, or we would encourage tweaking. Those are the developers' jobs. So the cost evaluation, one component, policy controls being the other component. And I think this is a lot of these are existing, but just this is a new angle, a refined angle on it. One of the pieces tied to each of those conditional commitments as we are deconstructing that process will be to identify what are the things that make this project the project. And so really it's defining what is a change. When do you the target population you serve, if you change that later, that feels like a big difference and a different project. If you say, oh, I'm going to serve veterans, oh no, now I'm going to serve elderly disabled. I think that those are okay, that might be the same building, but it's a different project because of who you're trying to serve. We want to, this is the update to a policy, but when projects are applying and use identifying the developer fee that they need, when the cost of other aspects of a building increase, we shouldn't also be floating up the developer fee. The developer fee covering their core business and their core risk areas. Establishing that material change process, when again defining what is a material change, and then having really deliberate oversight over that. And then we have currently already established an existing national best practice to prevent fraud, which is to not allow cost savings clauses where when money is saved on a project, the developer or the contractor gets to hold those resources. That has, well, it seems like it's a performance incentive. It also has been a tool for fraud. And so that has been a practice that we have implemented to prevent fraud. Then the last piece are subsidy limits. So we want to align, and so this is a change. So I guess we have approached subsidy limits a little bit differently in each NOFA aligned policy. And so this is bringing everything together. Recommendations include subsidy limits based on the income band that you're planning to serve. Put more resources to a unit that is serving a 40% population than one is serving 60%. We want to scale resources based on how large those units are. A studio should have lesser subsidy in it than a 3-bedroom unit. We need to provide that upfront clarity for developers about what resources they can essentially count on as we get through, but also allow some discretion and ability to flex internally as we see shifts and change. So we'll need to define what that flexibility is, put some parameters and analysis around it, but have it be, again, allow us to do the collaborative iteration work within a defined reasonability frame. And then, I think as we were, reconciling, trying to have not 100 different subsidy limits based on all of the different pieces, also needing to acknowledge and reflect in here that some projects need greater investment because they are having really and incorporating really unique or responsive building design elements. And so things like additional durability or access in the community space, or the amenities that ag worker housing projects need in order to help workers transition safely from working in agriculture out in the with chemicals and all of the other things that they would otherwise have to bring into their homes to be able to do that. So I think that there's a lot of those populations that we serve that would be essentially eligible to then have another just subsidy limit calculated based on what we would anticipate needing to be additional cost to the building as a whole. And so this is the draft numbers on those. This is something that we will be sharing with partners. Well, they're here now, I'm sure, watching, and we'll be sharing with partners for their delivered input. But again, the idea of having AMI aligned income subsidy limits, and then aligning to per bedroom. So up here is the base, the top table is the base table. The bottom would be the numbers for new construction versus acquisition and rehabilitation. And then this first recommendation is a additional $200,000 per project. And I need to emphasize, this is, again, the first time it's being shared. It is absolutely an introduction. We are seeking input. And we'll be able to share more about what we are hearing about these numbers, but just wanting to get this overall concept on approaching cost controls in front of Housing Stability Council for any thoughts or guidance, and would be curious for anything around that, as well as what additional information or curiosities you might have that I can be making sure to provide as follow-up.
Okay, council. Questions, comments, feedback at this point? Councilmember Harris.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. This is really informative and interesting. I did have one question about the value engineering process, and thank you for explaining that a bit. It's my understanding, though, that there's going to be some programming elements that are flagged more or less as non-negotiable, and so can't be removed from the building. In terms of the material changes, such as the exterior materials that you may look at being able to reduce for cost, from a cost perspective, a lot of those, at least in the city of Portland, are mandated by the design review process. And I'm curious if those will also be flagged and taken into consideration for the value engineering analysis, or if there could be dialogue between the jurisdictions and OHCS.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and I'm keenly interested for your expertise to really define this out as we step into trying to have a little more rigor around these pieces, but not need to balance that with what is our role and how are we aligning? So I think, again, wanting to get a lot of different points of influence to build our own internal comfort around our state decision making and stewardship of resources, but not wanting to make a decision that is not in alignment with what local community needs, is not in alignment with serving tenants. And so I think the answer is yes to all of those things, and that where things are required, we need to be deferential to lenders around what they need in deals. We need to be deferential to local jurisdictions about what they consider non-negotiables. And I think the value engineering is a piece and a term that we have incorporated as we try to, at this point, as we try to really address huge issues, right? Like, this project cannot go forward, so let's all go around to the value engineering place, and saying when we're intervening with it at that like high pressure place, it is probably the wrong time. So if we had engaged with it and understood it along the way, maybe that makes that conversation less critical or less like a big pivot and more like an evolution in the next step. And I guess I'm hopeful that allows us to be more collaborative partners. And I think it is also fraught because that carries a lot of risk of, yikes, are they going to tell us to build that with this other material? And I think our architect, Kevin Burgee, and others on our team, like, it's not always the right answer to say use the cheaper material. We need these projects to last. And so I think, again, the idea is to make sure that we are aware, understanding, and collaborative partners. And so I think it'll be important to really describe that well. And I think having engagement to understand and unpack that with the technical experts will be critical to being able to do so.
Thank you.
Councilmember Manu.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Natasha. This is a very interesting concept, and I think the key word here is flexibility. I think that one concern that I have is, does the agency have the capacity to do this in-depth construction oversight that it has not been used to? And what kind of a bottleneck would that create if there isn't that for the projects to move forward, and kind of diminishes the opportunity that you're trying to create here of an ongoing process?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. We did get additional, at least one, if not two additional positions that would help to be dedicated to this work. I also, as I've talked with the team, in terms of launching it, we'll need to, I think define it as we go. And if we don't have capacity to do it, we'll need to, we'll need to right size our degree of relationship and engagement around it with our capacity to do so. So maybe there will be more at first, especially more, I think, the idea of using that predictive cost model, let's dig in more in the projects where we're seeing things flagged as outliers. And let's and right size that to make sure that we are not a roadblock to moving things forward. I think, and also appreciating the fact that this hasn't been a structure we have done. And so we will learn it and need to continue to invest and grow it as we go. But so it really will need, I think what I'm really describing, we'll need an implementation strategy for that. And that might mean that it starts to evolve and look different as we get practiced at it and understand the details of what we need. And so I think it'll be empowering staff to inform and sponsors to indicate when, timing deliverables and others that need to be identified through that.
Just a quick follow-up. It's as you mentioned, it's so true that cost reasons, escalating cost reasons are hundreds of them, right? Depending as to where the site is and all those things. And for us in Beaverton, as we look at expanded areas, incorporated areas that need infrastructure, many of these projects, housing projects, pay for that infrastructure that it's not really taken into account when you look at a per unit number and those type of things. So that's what I get to flexibility, and that's just one example of hundreds of them throughout the state. I just want to make sure that we keep it
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that is, I think flexibility is collaboration. I think it's not, we need accountability, but we need to have a collaboration. So I think it's, identifying what is the accountability measures and what is the collaboration space, and needing to really communicate and have consistency around that. Okay, and so not seeing other comments, I'll wrap us up here. So our next steps, we've be sharing the cost control and oversight. I'm sure a lot of folks that are watching this call to have seen this presentation. We did have an engagement on Wednesday this week and got some really incredible feedback generating and questions that we will be drafting responses on to share back out. And we'll be sharing that out broadly to all our advisory lists on Tuesday, and have a means for collecting feedback on that. We are continuing engagement. I just mentioned we had one on this past Wednesday. The 12th, we'll have one dedicated to capacity building. We have 2 other dates flagged for topics yet to be prioritized because we want to respond to where we are and what needs to be discussed, and working toward making sure that we're bringing forward to March and then April Housing Stability Council recommendations. Again, the information that you have engaged in, this is the early information. These are not decisions. This is at the time when we are getting feedback on the recommendations that we're making. And so we'll be able to provide them to Housing Stability Council with acknowledgement and understanding of what that feedback has been. And so really, I appreciate again the discussion today. I will wrap up this agenda item, and I do believe that we have our presenter here from the early learning at the Raise Up Oregon report. And so I think Chair Hall, do we want to switch to that now?
Yes, let's.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Chair Hall and council members for inviting me to join you this morning. My name is Sue Miller and I chair the Oregon Early Learning Council. So I think you will see that we have a lot in common as we look at our strategic plan this morning. I also want to thank Director Bell for serving on the Early Learning Council. She is one of our 6 agency partner directors who sit on the council as ex officio members. And as you know, and we will be talking about a lot in the next several minutes, housing is a critical part of putting an early childhood system together. I also want to thank 2 of your staff people, Chelsea Bunch and Mitch Hanush, who serve on an implementation team made up of the senior staff from our 6 agency partners. They meet monthly in an effort to implement our strategic plan and also to track the progress in meeting the goals in the plan. So Chelsea and Mitch, you're great partners as well. Next slide, please, Gabby. So the council was created in 2011, and then, as you know, legislatures tweak things over time. And the most recent modification was in 2019. We have, ORSs that define who we are and what we do. We now have 11 voting members. These are community members from all around the state, as well as the 6 ex officio members who are the council or the agency directors that I just mentioned. Next slide, Gabby, please. So the purpose statement, and you can see this in our strategic plan, we are charged with creating and coordinating a unified, aligned system of early learning throughout Oregon. So this is an obviously a little daunting purpose to ensure that all children, no matter what their background or community, enter school ready to learn, and that all families are healthy, stable, and attached. We adopt and track implementation of the 5-year plan, as I just mentioned, at our various council meetings. And I know we provided a link to our strategic plan in your packet. So I'll be referring to that plan a lot in the next few minutes. Next slide, please, Gabby. So that's the cover of our plan, which always makes me smile when I see it. Next slide, Gabby. I wanted to just show this briefly to show you the amount of community engagement that we conducted as we put this plan together. We took over 18 months to reach out to communities, once again, all over the state. We held community listening sessions as a council. We engaged with the Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance. We worked with our early learning hubs, and I'll talk about them in just a minute. We were very specific to make sure we were talking with families and getting their direct input, families who have been involved in the early childhood system, and also with culturally specific organizations, as well as general CBOs around the state. This map shows the 16 early learning hubs that we have in the state. They cover the whole state, and some of them are very large geographically and some very large population-wise. The early learning hubs are basically the implementers, the on-the-ground regional implementers for our plan. Each of these hubs has a governing body, and that governing body is made up of representatives from the 6 agencies who are represented on the council, as well as tribes, families, specific, culturally specific organizations from their regions. And I want to just mention that there are some of these hub governing bodies that do not have a housing representative on them yet. So at some point, if we can get any help in recruiting a regional housing member to serve on a couple of these governing boards, that would be a big help. So just wanted to throw that out there. And also another foundational part of putting our plan together was looking at all of the agency partners' strategic plans and incorporating the parts of those that are related to early childhood, young children, basically prenatal to 5 through 5 is the population we focus on and their families. So staff reviewed all of those strategic plans as well to make sure we're aligned with those. So it was a very ambitious project. Gabby, next. So here is our vision, and here is what we refer to as the petals of the flower. These are the 6 agencies that are represented on the council. Their directors serve on the council. They also, as you I'm sure will see, are some of the sectors in the work that are essential in building an early childhood system that supports children and families. So the vision that we are trying to attain is that all of Oregon's young children prenatal to age 5 experience an early start that results in positive health, education, and life outcomes, regardless of zip code, race, and family income. And as I was sort of looking at your website, I realized that you also have a pretty ambitious mission to provide leadership in and review and set policy for the development and financing of affordable housing throughout the state of Oregon. So I have a feeling we can relate to each other as having a very ambitious North Star, but we need the North Star to ever get there. We have 3 goals in the plan. The first one is a system goal that it's equitable, integrated, accessible, inclusive, anti-racist, and family-centered. The second goal is related to families, that all families with young children are supported to ensure their well-being. And third is related to children. All children are thriving in early childhood and beyond. Definitely aspirational, but they guide the work that we do. Gabby, next slide, please. So this is just a graphic trying to show the system with these 6 agency partners sitting together and trying to coordinate our work so that we're focused on meeting those goals, basically, but really supporting families with young children to be successful. I think in a way, we almost could put every state agency in this system graphic because probably every agency has some work that affects families and families with young children, but these 6 for now are plenty to be working with. And I had a conversation recently with actually the governor and her staff. And she was encouraging us, the Early Learning Council, to really focus on the upstream wraparound services that families need in order to be successful. And, you know, we're all trying to get ahead of the curve and not always be trying to correct or remedy problems that are created. And what we all know is that housing is an essential part of family stability, as well as a human right. There's no doubt about that. So that's the system that we are creating and a part. Next slide, Gabby. So I want to just take a few minutes to talk about some of the specific parts of our plan that relate to housing. And I want to just show you the structure or the architecture of our plan. We have the 3 goals that I just mentioned, and then under each of those goals, we have objectives. There's 16 total in the plan, We have strategies under each objective, and then under each strategy, we have specific actions that are going to be taken to meet that strategy. So it's a very detailed plan, which is thanks to people like Mitch and Chelsea sitting on this implementation team that I mentioned. And affordable housing obviously is a really key piece for us. If you, so there's 3 strategies within this objective. And then if you look at our plan, you will see that there are 11 actions under those strategies to actually implement that target. So that's an objective with strategies. And Gabby, will you go to the next slide? So here's a strategy to co-locate affordable housing and early childhood programs. And then there are these actions under that, getting very specific about what will it take to make that happen. And Mitch just sent me well, before I go there, so you'll see, if you look at our plan, you would see that there are 5 agencies that are working and committed to making this strategy happen. In our plan, when you look at it, you'll see there's a icon for each of the 6 agency partners so that it's easy to skim through the plan and see where do you all show up, where is OHCS. But on this objective, on strategy 2.8, you will see that there are 5 icons because OHA, DELC, ODHS, ODE, and of course you are all committed to working on and collaborating to help with the co-location of affordable housing and ECE programs. And I just want to do a quick aside. I saw, I think in one of your minutes of your meeting, the Killingsworth Apartments project. And I was really excited to see in that it includes space for an early learning center on the ground level. So I know these co-locations are happening. Next slide, Gabby, please. So here's another one also related obviously to the co-location project. Mitch sent me the most recent CARE report. Thank you, Mitch. That shows the progress being made in launching this CARE program. You can imagine how excited the early learning sector is to see this. And I looked at the advisory committee members that have been appointed to date. I know several of them, so I know you're going to be getting great input and great expertise from these other community partners. There are, just within this strategy, 1410, which is implement the co-location fund and early learning and care. Within that strategy, we have 12 specific actions that are being taken, and I'm not going to read them, they're in your packet, but you will see that it's very specific and it's how the CARE program is being rolled out. So I guess I want to emphasize this is a very active plan and not one that's going to sit on the shelf for 5 years and then we'll pull it off and see how we did. And of course, DELC is a very critical partner in implementation of the CARE program. And also, if you go to, if you look down at almost the last bullet here, the 1410.5, the early learning hubs are mentioned, which I talked about a little earlier. And they, as I said, are helping with this regional coordination. So they are really sprinkled all through our plan as implementers of many of our different strategies. Next slide, please. Yeah, just more of those 12 specific actions for the CARE program. Next slide, please, Gabby. So this slide is just an effort to pull a very few number of strategies out of the plan that show where the other sectors overlap and engage with housing. I'm sure you all are aware of the 1115 Medicaid waiver, an incredibly exciting advancement for kids and families and really all Oregonians. And having housing be a specific part of that waiver on Medicaid funding is a huge step forward. I think we all can thank OHA for the work that they've done to make that happen. Once again, the hubs are mentioned, and they're key to our success, and hopefully they would advance your work in different regions. Home visiting, the only standing committee our council has is a home visiting system committee, which is, once again, trying to coordinate the myriad home visiting programs that exist in Oregon. Each of them is great, but they aren't very well coordinated. So that's what the committee is doing. And as I said earlier, obviously for home visiting to work, and it's really focused on prenatal to 3-year-olds, which is when all the major brain development happens. For the home visiting programs to work, families need to have a safe, secure place to be living. So directly tied to the work that you all are doing. Facilities fund is super important and also includes, in-home care for kids. So once again, housing. And then ODHS, a huge partner for us in many of the programs that they run. And I'm guessing one eligibility is something that you all are keeping your eyes on, just as a lot of early learning programs are as well. Next slide, Gabby. So those were the comments that I wanted to offer, a kind of obviously a pretty quick review of a 50-page strategic plan. I hope that our councils will find ways that we can connect and work together. Our council meets monthly, and in May, our agenda will include a focus on housing. So it would be great to have any of you council members or Chair Hall join us. Director Bell will be there anyway as a member of the council, but we would certainly love to have you join us for a part of that meeting and share more information about your council and the work that you're doing that is so critical for us, meeting the needs of kids and families in Oregon. So with that, I will stop talking, see if there are any questions. Gabby is our fabulous council administrator. There's her contact information. So for follow-up questions, you can also contact her.
Hey, comments, feedback, questions, thoughts from the council? Well, thank you for great, very informative presentation, and I do have a feeling that the work of these two councils will be even more, I guess, in sync as the years roll by. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hall.
Okay. Let's see. Funding resource and process updates.
I think that, so we switched agenda items.
That's right.
So, yeah,
Because
so
of
appreciate
availability.
it. Chair Hall, Housing Stability Council, and I think with that we have, we are behind schedule, but we have wrapped up our agenda items. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks. Well, I guess actually we're a little ahead of schedule because it's only 12 minutes after 11. We're not supposed to break till 11:30. So let's take our approximately 15-minute break now. Try to be back, 11:27. Thank you very much.
$5 million. $5 million in one-time funding to provide services to this younger school age demographic of folks, including families. The legislative intent of this funding is really broad. So bill language didn't include direction around the types of services that might be provided. There was no direction around geographic allocation of where this funding would need to be deployed or the amount of awards or number of awards. We will be going through some of the proposed initial orientation to how we're thinking about this funding and where we see some opportunities to narrow the scope and really be effective with how we will be allocating the funding. So our initial design proposal directs services to be funded in regions that have high numbers or high percentages of homeless students, as identified by school district and data provided by the Oregon Department of Education's report card, and are at the same time in geographic areas outside of the areas of greatest investment through the Executive Orders 2302. I know that the council is familiar with the rental assistance for youth program that our division also administers, the RAY program. That program is providing long-term rent support to young folks who are ages 24 or younger and are largely unaccompanied youth. So I wanted to take just a quick moment to do a little bit of a compare and contrast to talk about this funding by way of explaining why we are thinking about this as kind of a separate program than the RAY program, because the intended recipients of the funding are in many ways in different circumstances. So largely the group that will be offered services through this funding is this younger demographic of K through 12 school age children. And so because of that, the students are much more likely to be in a household that has a caregiver or a parent. And so that provides an opportunity to allocate this funding in a way that supports a whole family solution to housing instability, that we can provide services and support to both the youth and their families. We also know that Black, Native American, and students who identify with 2 or more races are overrepresented in this population. And also, according to Schoolhouse Connection data, in 2021-22, Hispanic students represented 31.8% of all students experiencing homelessness in Oregon. And during that same time period, Latino or Latinx folks in Oregon represented about 14 or a little over 14% of the population. And some specific ways we're thinking about allocating the resources to services are, of course, rehousing and eviction prevention programs, but recognizing the specific needs of this population, we're also looking at economic and stability and workforce supports, educational goal setting and attainment, and food and nutrition and childcare service connection. We have started initial stakeholder and community engagement efforts. We are looking at this in 2 phases. So phase 1 is kind of the work that we've already done with some early engagement with the Oregon Department of Education, with McKinney-Vento liaisons, tribal partners, and family homelessness experts, including a small subgroup of folks from the Housing Stability Council. This program is also the first program within the Housing Stabilization Division to be using our racial equity analysis tool, and that process of looking at this program through the lens of that tool is ongoing. This initial phase was really a discovery phase, because the legislative language was so broad, we really were viewing these initial conversations as ways to gather some information about how we could potentially narrow the scope of the range of options out there, because we know that $5 million in one-time funding is not going to begin to match the statewide need for these types of services. And so we will be moving into phase 2 of engagement with a more narrowly focused priority areas. We can do more engagement at the local stakeholder level to identify active and education invested culturally specific organizations and other service providers who are already doing this work in their communities. We also plan to leverage the work of the executive orders and the work that they did around community planning and viewing through the lens of the school districts that have the disproportionate numbers of families experiencing homelessness. And then we'll continue engagement with our system level partners, including the governor's office, with councils and advocates, continued conversations with Department of Education colleagues and colleagues from the Oregon Department of Human Services. From these initial conversations and engagements, we have already heard some values loud and clear. We need to require culturally competent service provision. We need to support responsive, trauma-informed, and family-specific interventions. And there's a strong opportunity to leverage existing supportive relationships that exist between the educational and housing systems of care. This is something that is really important as we look at this as one-time funding, that there are folks out there already doing this work and doing it successfully, and that with the one-time funding, this may not be the opportunity to create huge new programs, but recognize the good work that's already existing out there. And then we do have already some identified outcomes we would like to see. So the first is this kind of testing the view that improved housing stability leads to better educational outcomes. And I think this is an area that we'll be exploring more. I think the focus on K-12 education really gives us an opportunity to work cross systems. Just as kind of an example in the Early Learning Council presentation. So that is something that we plan to pursue. We do really want to make sure that services are provided to both students and their family members to help the entire family reach their goals. And then we're looking at reaching populations overrepresented in homelessness data and racial demographic information. And then also, secondly, that receive less investment through the executive order funding. So, that is largely balance of state rural areas, largely, but not exclusively. And so this is the high-level summary of some of the analysis we did comparing the Department of Education statewide report card data and our own data. So again, this is a direction we could go and some early thinking about how to narrow the range of opportunities. And so we're looking at these high opportunity areas specifically. LPG here stands for local planning groups. That is the name of the coordinating bodies attached to the executive order work outside of the MAC group regions. And so you can see that we are looking at highest percentage of homeless students by school district, highest number of students, homeless students by school district, and then this third category of high unsheltered population of homeless students, as well as this highest percentage and highest number. In this next slide, I'm going to show another view of our methodology here. This is the last slide I have to present before we get into the discussion, so we can spend as much or as little time here as you would like. But just to, there were a couple things I wanted to call out here specifically. One being kind of this last point that the executive order work, through the executive order work, the Balances State Region submitted community plans that identified their greatest needs and most vulnerable populations. And their planning also included addressing racial disparities and plans for intentional collaboration with CSOs and CBOs in their regions. So that is an area of work we want to continue to support and make sure we're considering in our orientation to this work as well. We have prepared a couple questions we would particularly like council member input into, but before I kind of dive into our priorities, I'd like to pause for a moment if there are questions or some initial responses council members would like to share.
Councilmember Farrell, to be followed by Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you for that. And it's great to see that some of the feedback that was provided like in those smaller meetings was definitely heard and taken into consideration. I think the one thing on here that just is maybe I have questions around is the emergency order certainly targeted certain communities, but I think even within those communities that received the lion's share of those funds, there were still a lot of exclusions of families and children who are experiencing homelessness if they didn't otherwise meet that literal definition, that definition of unhoused. So I just want to make sure we're not excluding those individuals again with this funding just because their community received prior emergency order funds. So I just want to clarify that even within those communities, there was still some discrepancy on the homeless definition and who was eligible. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. And I think we also have the flexibility within this program to use the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, and that is our intention.
Hey, Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you, Chair Hall and other members. I am thankful for this presentation. The question that I have is around the list of priorities. So you had it for, highest percentage by school district, and then unsheltered, but I'm wondering if or not we know what the demographics are of those particular groups.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And you're anticipating one of our questions for this group. The next body of work we've identified here is a comparison of the disparities within those broad geographic areas that we're looking at. And so, for example, the way that this will look for is looking at the specific school districts and finding the disaggregated racial demographic information and really making sure that, if we're looking at the percentage of overrepresentation of Hispanic students, for example, are we really going to address that by looking at these specific school districts, or do we really need to look at different school districts if that still may be within that high percentage or high number or high unsheltered, but would get us closer to that racial equity outcome goal?
Thank you.
Councilmember Meehan.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation and for putting your due diligence into this work. One of the things I wanted to bring up, I met with Gresham Barlow School District's housing houseless group, and basically that they were administrators from the district that administrated funds or that received reports and dealt with folks that were houseless, students that were houseless. And one of their concerns or one of their issues was that that it's a McKinney-Vento project, but when they have students that are houseless that, they refer them to the next agency, and then they really don't have a follow-up, and they really didn't have a say in how these funds were distributed, or even follow up with if funds were distributed and helped these families out. So that I would encourage that you include the folks that are in these districts that are already doing the work through the McKinney-Vento project is what I understand it to be. And they actually get together statewide once a month and get together and talk about, different issues, these different districts represented in this meeting across the state for students. So it's just that they had some feedback about how their hands are kind of tied, and that they really weren't able to do some of the work they wanted to do, nor did they get the feedback on if the students actually were getting help or whatnot once they passed on their recommendation. So that was my comment.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We did talk to one McKinney-Vento liaison in our early stages of engagement and heard just what you said. And I think you're right, there are opportunities, and through our OD partners, they've invited us to connect with that monthly meeting of the McKinney-Vento liaisons. And I think there are some really great examples of service provider McKinney-Vento relationships that are working really well throughout the state. And as we move into the second phase of community engagement, we're really interested in learning more about those partnerships. Where are they? Why are they successful? And how has that communication been set up to be successful? So there is more of that back and forth. So thank you so much for raising that.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. I just had one clarifying question. I'm not sure if you're able to flip back to the slide that I think was right before the community engagement and stakeholder slide. Forget what the title of that was. Yeah, so that one. So the services that are listed there, I'm curious if there's any emphasis or opportunity to intervene prior to the rehousing and eviction process. And if there is, if you can go over that a bit, or if there's any materials on that.
Yeah, so, we are looking at eviction prevention as part of what is allowable and something that we want to encourage as part of this. I think, one of the orientations that might be helpful is that we will be funding service providers, either through perhaps a local planning group or directly on their own. And so, I think there are different orientations to how you connect with somebody before they are in that eviction process or before they lose their housing. And I think individual providers have a lot of experience doing that work and identifying folks that way, because I do think another interesting piece about tying this in some ways to communicating with McKinney-Vento liaisons is that a student doesn't qualify for McKinney-Vento until they are houseless or homeless. So, we aren't looking at it exclusively through that lens. There is also this opportunity to intervene before the point that somebody is experiencing homelessness.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Chair Hall. Thank you for the presentation and the opportunity to engage with you all on this. I just want to make a couple of points that I've shared with you before for my other council members. So it's important to me that we openly acknowledge that this is one-time only money. So we should not be building anything that is of a structural systemic nature, because we won't be able to fund it when the $5 million is gone. The second piece of that is $5 million to help statewide. I mean, I have some empathy for staff of the legislation intent is so broad that $5 million is a drop in a bucket of really anything, as long as it's helping, right? Kind of suggestion. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to target and focus our attention and our intervention. I really appreciate all of the work to understand what the current system of care is within schools and families with children in schools, particularly with McKinney-Vento. I absolutely support that we should align this one-time only, small amount of funds with the existing service system. I absolutely support that we do not do a prolonged and engaged procurement, that we fund in alignment where we have already procured or another public agency has already procured. And finally, I just want to say sometimes people who are living in poverty need and want services. And sometimes people living in poverty simply need access to cash. And I very much want us to think about the possibility of using this money as a basic income test, aligned with the districts where there's active McKinney-Vento involvement and engagement, and also the 2 generational work that has been happening for several years out of the ODHS, Department of Human Services, so that again, we're looking at these, I think this happens a lot. We get a little bit of money, it's one time only, and we feel like we got to go out and do something very, very different. I appreciate that we are thinking about how do we layer and braid and build upon what's already happening. And I want to just encourage us to be as bold as we can around that, which would lead us towards consideration of some of the opinions I just shared. Thank you.
Hey, further feedback from the council? Well, I will just add that I appreciate the presentation as well. Exciting, and being a great supporter and fan of universal basic, excuse me, income. I think any opportunity we get, and it seems like there's more and more of them all the time, but any opportunity we have to further test it, proof of concept, I'm all for it. Anyone with any final words of wisdom or just words on this topic? Okay.
Chair Hall, Chair
Yes.
Hall, I am happy to hand over my time here. I'm not sure where we are on time. There were a couple specific questions here, and I'm happy if council members feel like they've had opportunity to weigh in, I'm happy to have the council move along. But if we do have a minute or two more, I'm also happy to have more directed conversation too.
Council, what's your pleasure? Well, why don't we just go ahead and move through those questions?
Thank you so much, Chair Hall. So this first question is really very aligned with part of what Council Member Lee just said, in that we are weighing our options as far as how to administer this funding. And so we started with the assumption that we would be going through a full procurement process as is agency policy. And I think in the smaller group conversations, we talked about the option of direct award, because the intention is really to minimize the administrative burden of applying for these funds. We are very interested to hear from the perspective of the council what you would like to see in kind of as a baseline of what you would like to see the organizations or the entities who would be distributing the funding or administrating the services to demonstrate their current connections within the community, or their existing relationship with school districts, or their ability to administer the funding. And like looking at something that is like maybe a very tightly focused request for applications that is more in line with a 1 or 2 page response.
Councilmember Farrell?
I can just sort of speak to that from firsthand knowledge, I guess, that within the world of McKinney-Vento, school districts do, if they have McKinney-Vento dollars, they are required to report on how those funds are spent. So the notion that there's a district who doesn't know how their funds are being spent is kind of unusual. Like that doesn't typically happen. And they're also required currently under the existing McKinney-Vento infrastructure through Oregon Department of Ed to demonstrate if they do have community-based organization partnerships. So there should be an ability to establish history, success in actually delivering funds and not just sort of sitting on them. And all of that should be pretty easy to demonstrate either through letters of support or contract agreements or, similar types of mechanisms that already exist.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, Councilmember Meehan.
So thank you very much, council member. When I had these discussions, I'm not sure that they weren't able to track or exactly, their funds and who the agencies and whatnot, but they just felt like they didn't have that connection with the families and weren't able to help out in that a direct way. For when you're homeless, I mean, it's a different concept. Everything is pretty right now. And I like the idea of Councilmember Lee saying, having some of that cash availability, because it's hard to wash laundry. It's hard to provide home cooked meals. It's hard to, carve. Every day is a survival of how you're going to cook your meals and how you're going to get clean and be ready for the next day when you're couch surfing or when you're living in a car or you're in a shelter and things like that. So that onboard cash, because it's expensive. It's not cheap to be homeless either when you're trying to maintain a kiddo going to school. Just from my firsthand experience, I know how tough it can be and needing that instant cash and kind of waiting for something to come through in a transition. So I do like that idea, especially since it's a one-time payment. Having some of that maybe be available would be a great way to cut through some of that paperwork and procurement timely and costly venture there. So
Okay, Councilmember Farrell.
That's an excellent point. And I totally support the sort of cash concept of just having some capacity for like direct cash transfers for youth. And there's a lot of programming that's happening at a national level right now that aligns with some of our state level pilot projects around that we can learn from. And I guess I would just also say that another benefit of partnering with community-based organizations for McKinney-Vento types of programming is that usually district personnel who don't have that kind of relationship are limited in their own capacity, and they actually have more red tape and bureaucracy and have a harder time facilitating something like cash or like vouchers for laundry. That it's actually usually easier for them to contract that through a community-based organization who's more responsive and can kind of address those things in a more rapid type of response than going through a purchase order process that school districts typically have to. So I'll just add that, like, cumbersome for districts to administer these kinds of funds in a flexible and quick response way.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers.
Yes, I too support the give people cash to help out immediately. However, I would encourage that we do partner with specific agencies that are used to administering those types of funds, and also set some guidelines and parameters for reporting so that they are properly tracking who they're doling out the funds to.
Okay, other council discussion, feedback?
I think that is also a really helpful view as we're thinking about the second bullet point here about goals specific to educational outcomes in a way that we really haven't evaluated with any frequency in OHCS before. We're really interested in council's perspective of how to maximize resources and service to like these educational outcomes. So helping students continue to attend school regularly and looking at things like improved attendance or test scores or other educational measures.
Okay, Councilmember Farrell.
Obviously, I have a lot of opinions on this topic. I do think that also if there are communities who have currently effective McKinney-Vento programs, they are already tracking that educational outcome, attendance, progress made towards graduation, on track to graduate in reading by 9th grade. And so I think that that is both a good thing. I'm a fan of outcome-based programs. All I will say that is continuing to be sort of like a sticking point for me is that we issue as a state far greater number of financial resources to the adult unhoused population, that we do not require that intensity around tracking outcomes on an individual basis. And I always just wonder why the tiny minutia amount of pennies that are going to support children and families always comes with the most amount of accountability. And I always just wonder why. It just feels like it's a lot of barriers to get not a lot of resources out to people who clearly need them.
Yeah, that reminds me of a bit of something a retired social worker friend said. As a general rule, we give people enough to starve on. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just want to uplift what Councilmember Farrell said. This is, I think, a very simple question to be answered, especially if we align our funding to the existing McKinney-Vento programs. There is such a ton of information that I do not think we need to put anything new in place to be able to measure any of this. And I think it's incumbent upon us to be explicit about what to right size the expectations of what $5 million of one-time only money in 12 months or 18 months or whatever we can cross the biennium, but let's say for 12 months, $5 million, one time only, what is the reasonable expectation for outcome? For me, it would be that the family is stable, right? They're not losing their housing. And it's simple, and we need to right size it. To expect that the fact that we drop, as you say, Councilmember Farrell, these pennies into the pool, and somehow these kids will be on track to graduate, they'll be on track to make grade point, they'll be on track, right? All the things we want is an unreal expectation. Kids have got to be safe in a home first, for all the reasons of being able to wash their clothes and have stability. They have to eat. They can't come to school hungry, right? And this money is not going to, it's why we have free and reduced lunch, all those kinds of things. We have to see this money as a very teeny part of a much more complex web of services and supports. And we have to right size why we're in, for what purpose are we in, and what can we expect as a result of us being in for this $5 million. And all of these outcomes are not appropriate. They are not appropriate. And I think we should say it explicitly and then say what we think we can commit to. Especially, there's a lot of measurement for families and individuals who have received either unconditional cash or are receiving a basic income, we could adopt any of those. And if in some way we're required to do all of these pieces, it's already being collected, as Councilmember Farrell said, by McKinney-Vento. Let us not spend any more time and effort gnawing at this. This is a pretty, I think, cut and dried place, with the exception of we should be speaking to what is a reasonable expectation for this amount of money and its purposes.
Councilmember Rogers.
The only thing I would like to add is that, yes, I think we should partner with those particular agencies that are already doing the tracking, because we're leveraging that. And I would just like, maybe at the end of the process, for whoever received funds, just to tell us how it helped them, you know, a survey on the other side. And it doesn't have to be long, just one question. How did it help you?
Mhm.
And I'm data driven, and I understand that it is one-time money, but I think if we have enough stories to say how it helped, and I'm thinking that a lot of it will be overlapping, a case could be presented as far as why this needs to become not just one-time money.
Anyone else want to weigh in right now? Well, have we, as the council, been able to give you some useful feedback, I hope?
It has been wonderful. I do have one last question.
Okay.
Because Councilmember Rogers just talked about data and evaluation. As I said a little bit earlier, one of our next steps is to take county level disaggregated population data to overlay with the homeless student or homelessness priority regions we discussed, to look at the racial disparity information. Are there any additional equity considerations the council would recommend we integrate into our framework?
Anyone? Oh, Councilmember Farrell, to be followed by Councilmember Rogers.
Yeah, again, all of that data should be available within those school districts. They're already tracking demographics by a lot of different factors. The only consideration I would caution you against is if you're just looking at districts with high percentages of McKinney-Vento students, that can be very misleading. That can give you a very tiny district that only has 30 kids. And if 3 of those kids are considered McKinney-Vento, you've already hit like a high level of McKinney-Vento. So you have to look beyond the district percentage of McKinney-Vento at total numbers per capita of your, is it a high number relative to the total number of kids in that community? And then you can further survey and narrow down by virtually every single component of data collection schools are doing, whether they have learning disabilities, whether they're English as a second language, whether they're, totally based on ethnicity, gender, behavior. Like, you could literally get probably more data from schools than you could get from almost any other organization.
Great. Councilmember Rogers.
So I'm not familiar with what all is tracked with the McKinney-Vento, but I would just be curious about the age of the children in the district, because I guess trying to overlay something additionally in the future to help with someone who's older. So if you have someone who's like going to be a young adult, to think about partnering them with services if it's needed in the future.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, I hope we've been helpful.
It has certainly been helpful. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the feedback, and we will take this back and develop a framework, and we will be bringing it back to council for a decision soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we are now, excuse me, on to our final agenda item, which will be presentation, discussion, and potential action on a public hearing process, essentially a new public hearing process for this council. Now, I want to say offhand, up front, several members of the council have approached me, especially over the last year plus, with concerns about our time for public comment and whether it's really effective, whether it's helpful for us, whether it's helpful for the people who are approaching us looking for information or solutions. So an overarching principle in this, as I worked with staff, and then we also, as part of our ongoing consultation with the Department of Justice, they were involved here, and they have given this a blessing as being within the guidelines of the public meetings law, which is another absolute foundational point on this. And in addition to helping the council to use its own time better, I believe the outcome of this will be a better closed feedback loop with members of the public. And again, DOJ told us we are not required to offer a general public comment period. However, we are required to hold public hearings on specific transactions. These will take place as part of the presentation, discussion, and voting on those items. So again, hopefully making a stronger, more direct linkage between the public testimony and the presentation and decision. I believe these proposed guidelines were provided to you, but I want to run through them. And again, the public input period is provided in accordance with the public meeting law. Registration to give public hearings on specific agenda items that fall under the public meeting law will be available on the website, essentially the same page where people go now to sign up. For each public hearing comment, each item that falls under the public hearing category will be allocated 5 minutes per topic unless time is extended by the chair. And again, attendees may not donate a portion or all of their time to another person. All remarks should be addressed to the council as a whole. And unfortunately, we're living in an age where this is necessary. Speakers shall refrain from comment on behavior that involves disorderly speech or action, obscene or indecent remarks, and derogatory comment in general, advertising or promoting the sale of products or services. And anyone who engages in speech or action as described in the previous 3 items, or when it disturbs or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the council meeting, the chair may, at her or their discretion, bar that person from offering verbal public comment for that session. And the chair may also set other reasonable and viewpoint neutral limits to aid efficiency of the council conducting business. So there's the proposal and some of the work and thinking that went into it. And folks, questions, feedback? Don't everybody talk at once. You don't want to have that problem with being disorderly. Councilmember Meehan.
Okay, well then I'll go first.
Thank you.
So I appreciate and respect why we need to do this here, and what I mean is the basic understanding of any kind of public comment in other forums for cities and city council and any other legislative processes we do at the Capitol. I mean, there is a topic at hand. This is what you comment on, and we move on. And you let us know what you're going to comment on before you come into the forum. I do feel that, especially with some of the issues with MAPOS 5 and things like that, that there needs to be some kind of other deal for those types of situations that are coming up that are not maybe agenda related. And is that the council's public comment time? It doesn't seem to be maybe in alignment with what we're supposed to do. And it does take away from what we're supposed to do and take away from the folks that are trying to provide testimony for the agenda items. So I feel strongly that we do need to, you know, wrap our arms around this. However, I don't want to just say, well, yeah, we need to do that and that's that. I feel like that there needs to be some kind of addressing or provision for folks who have other topics that are, you know, Oregon housing community services related. So that's my thoughts on it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to offer, you know, a couple of thoughts in follow-up. You know, I think some people perhaps have a mindset that, oh, once a month, Friday morning, 9 a.m., sign up for the meeting, give my 2 or 3 minutes and just kind of move on, as if that, though, is the only opportunity to engage OHCS, when in fact, I think we've tried to make it clear, staff has tried to make it clear that our virtual door is open anytime, and we really want to encourage people to take advantage of that. So, you know, rather than, you know, I'm going to say it, that too many of the public comment periods have just felt chaotic, confusing, and confrontational. And based on the feedback we've had from some people, they don't find it helpful or worthwhile process at all. But we'll see. Okay, Councilmember DeFontorum.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I appreciate your comments. I'm looking for your name. Councilmember Meehan, is that how you say it? Yeah, I appreciate your comments. I do agree we need a framework. I think that to me, there's often a disconnect between the public comment and the business that we're convened to conduct. I also do agree that we don't want to give the impression that people do not have a voice or the right to complain. I just don't know if this is the forum for it. So I agree that some alternate forum that is not a business meeting might make more sense than the council's monthly meeting, where we have a limited amount of time to go through what I feel are sometimes some pretty complex financial transactions, and it takes like every last brain cell I have some days. Oh, this is a public meeting, I shouldn't say that. Okay. So my only question, and I don't know if this is a Chair Hall question, so how functionally do we see this working? Somebody signs up for public comment, you're not sure what they're going to comment about, seems to be the right topic, and then they get out of hand. They get like derogatory or any of these things listed under item 6. How do we deal with that? Do you just like mute them? I'm a process person, so I'm just curious how that functionally would work. That's all. I support a process, and I appreciate that this is coming forward today.
Okay. And my apologies, I had somebody pop into the office with something, and I'm not sure if I got all your question, Councilor DeFontorum, framed correctly in my mind. Would you mind one more time? Just
yeah, sure, Chair Hall. just as a matter of process, how
Mhm.
would you implement like item 6? If you thought someone was on the agenda for, an appropriate reason, and then they started like getting out of line, saying obscene language, being really off topic, saying derogatory comments, which we hear a lot of.
Mhm.
How would you functionally handle that? Would like somebody mute them? I'm just curious how that would be handled.
I think either the chair or staff conducting the meeting would be able to mute them if necessary and terminate the call. I mean, I'm grateful we haven't had to deal with it with this body, but I know a whole lot of bodies, especially in the last couple of years, that have had deal with wildly inappropriate things at their meetings. Okay, Council Member Farrell. Oh, and then Director Bell.
I'll be quick because I feel like all the comments have been made, and I just want to say those comments resonate with me. I think the hardest thing for a council member sometimes with public comment is like, I don't want to ever limit somebody's ability to sort of feel like they have a voice to this sort of public entity. So it's not about like trying to restrict public voice, but maybe this isn't like reflective of the work we as a council are directly connected to. And so sometimes it is hard, and it sort of makes us go down a rabbit hole like, oh, is this something we should be more involved in because there's so much public comment around it versus that isn't actually the work of the council. And so having an alternative framework period, but having an alternative mechanism for public comment that's more general versus related to council work and agendas would probably be helpful.
Okay. Director Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hall. I wanted to just very quickly add, perhaps offer a little bit more contour and detail to Councilmember Diefentorm's specific question on process. So I think there's a couple of things here. I think from what is proposed, it isn't really built out for the outlier, but it is intended to offer a framework and guidance and shared expectations. I think at least since my tenure at the agency, we've never had a framework. We've never had really anything in writing guiding public input ever. So I think we're moving into the right decade in terms of just to be quite candid with the council. But as an extension of that, first I would just say that the guidance which is proposed and I think in front of council would be posted on the council website. And that is intended to offer a place to say that if you are signing up for public input, that means that you are adhering to these guidelines and that you are adhering to the decorum that is laid out. And if there's a conscious decision not to do that, then we would, given that this is a public meeting and we want to honor everybody's time, then we would need to mute that conversation, disrupt that, any language that is disruptive. So that's thing one in terms of just guidance, having a shared framework. And then I think the second piece that I would offer Councilmember Diefentorm and really all council members is there's another component of this, which is more about the facilitation of it, which is how it's facilitated, which like any new thing, I'm sure it'll be a little bit clunky in the beginning. But part of why we're bringing this into a public conversation is so that anybody under the sound of our voice today can engage and can hear. And I think as we facilitate it, we'll open up a public hearing for those specific items that under the law are those items such as transactions that require a public hearing, in which we would open up a public hearing, accept that public input, and move on to the remaining part of the agenda. So hopefully that offers some clarity to the question that you posed.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I absolutely support our actions in doing this. As Director Bell said, we haven't had a practice and we haven't laid out the parameters for people to understand what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior, other than, sign up at this time, you get 2 to 3 minutes. So I think this would be helpful for all of us. I have a couple of just questions and we don't need to go into them now. I wonder if we could set whatever practice we agree to do, and then put it on our agenda to check in about how it's working like 6 months later, right? So if this is new practice, let's implement it, let's make all our mistakes, let's, do all the testing of it, and then come back and reevaluate what worked, what didn't work, and what we'd like to do differently, in 6 months. I don't want us to go a year with this. Two is, I wonder when things are not hot, it's fine. When things are hot, it becomes, I think, very difficult to facilitate, as you say, Director Bell. And I wonder if not to delay us making a decisions here, we could offer some examples of what the behavior and engagement is that we're looking for, and or conversely, what we are not looking for, right? So if someone's, we don't want to stifle free speech. However, someone who's saying that's so-and-so, rah, 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 is an example of behavior that I'm not comfortable with, right? And I think we want to have some examples of that. So when the facilitation has to take us there, and hopefully it's not very often at all, we don't get back, well, why did you police me? You didn't police them, all of those kinds of things. So I offer that as a suggestion. And then finally, I wonder if we could both start it and test it, so that at next month's meeting, we could invite public comment on the practice we're implementing, right? So people could say, I think this is going in the right direction. Here's what I'm interested in. If we feel like we want to have a chance to talk about that with the people who are spending their time to come and give public testimony here, which is such a critical piece of our democratic process. So in general, I think we should do it. It's been vetted by the Department of Justice. We need to have a different practice, and I'm happy to test this, see what we think about. And if we want more feedback from the community, that we schedule that and use this process to do that at next month's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Meehan.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Thank you, Chair Hall. The one thing that I wanted to add to that is like today, for example, with the mobile home parks and the 10-day and CASA and the whole nine, that was an important thing for us to hear, and awesome follow through. Chair Hall said, hey, the staff will be getting hold of you folks to follow through with what the agency can do, that kind of thing. So it had nothing to do with our agenda, but it was definitely important information. Deciphering that kind of stuff, I don't know. I just want to throw that in there because I feel like that's important and in alignment with what we're doing. So deciphering that's going to be tricky maybe at times.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just want to say that I'm aligned with this new process and open to trying it out. I just wanted to echo that I think it is important to make sure that the community needs are being heard, because sometimes those are very different than what the policy side of things are privy to. And just for me personally, as other council members were saying, the discussions this morning brought, I think, very important perspectives, or very eye-opening. So I am on board for trying this out, as long as perhaps we can make sure that public input public is giving the opportunity to provide public input on the process, and we allow for other forums for those comments to be heard and tracked and acted on.
Okay. Director Bell.
Yep, appreciate all of the feedback. I want to uplift a couple things, and then I think get a little bit more specific and not on the edges with a couple things Councilmember Harris brought up. So first, I want to uplift what I heard from Councilmember Lee about moving forward, and then also proactively securing time for us to assess and see where things need to be changed and evolved, like any process that moving forward. So certainly a commitment to that. I'm also reflecting what I heard from Councilmember Lee about maybe the council, with support of the agency, also describing some examples. So in those moments where it's probably not the standard, but could be an eventual, where we have those instances in which the facilitation needs to live up to the guidance, because there's also accountability to us and to the council to live out our role and responsibility in that we understand what those examples are, so that we can point to that and know that, and not just assume that we have the same understanding of when the facilitation needs to perhaps pivot. So that's thing two. And so I want to appreciate that, and we'll take that up, Chair Hall, to follow up. I think more specifically, Councilmember Harris, and I think you reflected, I think, some larger themes about, one, recognizing that this is a shift and there's alignment towards this direction, but there is a values place in terms of wanting to hear from the public and wanting to know the things that aren't on the agenda, but that are impacting the people of Oregon, so that the council can keep a pulse on that. I think one of the things, and it is probably just one of the things that we can do to help make sure that the council has awareness of is that public input, getting public feedback is not specific or concentrated to a monthly meeting. That the agency does that all day, every day, all week, every week. And so I think the council, that makes it to the council in dribs and drabs, but that's what the agency does all day. That is part of the reason for our existence. And so what I think I can do to be responsive to that is to make sure that the council has clarity and specificity about what those other spaces and forums and instances are, so that, one, you can have assurance of when and how that happens, but also recognize that offering public input verbally does not negate the opportunity and the instances in which you will continue to get written feedback. And in those instances, I would expect and encourage them to, for us to still make space at the public meeting to have discourse about that, for the council to understand and unpack it, and then for the council to weigh in and offer advisement about follow-up. So I want to just offer the reality that this new process, while it is new and it is a shift, there are still a host of other areas where I would expect that there would be feedback and public input in various forms, and would encourage and expect that the council would still be just as engaged, even if it isn't offered verbally.
Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you for that, Director Bell. Yes, you guys are doing the work. So you hear about stuff all the time, and letting us know what some of those hot topics are would be helpful. However, I am still concerned and want to have the public feel like they can be heard by the council in case they feel they're not being heard by the agency, because a lot of times I get the sense that that's why we do have people that keep returning, is because they don't like the answer that they're getting from the agency. And so food for thought, perhaps we could have an agenda item to say, you know, other public concerns, and they could offer, you know, just be given 1 minute or 2 minutes or something. I'm not sure what the structure would look like, but just wanting there to be an opportunity on our agenda for people to actually come, because a lot of people don't know about the process, or maybe, you know, they just heard about the agency. And so somebody said, oh, well, they have these monthly meetings, and it's like, I'll go there and talk. So I just want to make sure that we're still allowing the public, those who may not be versed in all of the way the processes work, to have an opportunity to make some sort of comment.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Well, let me try to recap what I think we have here, I hope. We do have I think, a consensus to go forward with this proposal, but we really want to underscore that it's as much about providing more effective feedback opportunities for members of the public as it is using our own time to its maximum advantage and allowing us to focus on our most critical tasks as a council. And so if you're agreeable, we can adopt it, but there's a definite commitment from me, I think from agency leadership, and I'll be listening to all of you, that we'll see how it works. And there may be some fine tuning over the next several months. Have I captured people's feelings? Okay, I'm seeing some nods and thumbs up. Thank you. Well, would somebody like to put this in the form of a motion, please?
I will make that motion.
Thank you. And-
Second.
Okay, I heard a second. Now, if we could have a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum,
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell, Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mena, I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Harris,
Yes.
Councilmember Meehan,
Yes.
and for the record, Councilmember Rodriguez has been excused. She had to step out.
All right.
Motion
Thank you all.
passes.
I'm sorry.
The motion passes.
Yay. Thank you all. And thank everybody involved with today's meeting. And it's Groundhog Day, right? And they say that Puxtahani Phil did not see his shadow, and at least here in Newport, the sun's shining brightly. So let's get out there and enjoy the weekend. And we'll see you all beginning of March. Where's the year going? Bye, everybody.